CD4. They arrived at Telton Hall later that afternoon. The traffic had been a bit heavy around Salisbury, adding extra time, but it was a pleasant drive, and Rhoda had followed behind Nate and Isaac's car.
"Ah, it's nice to see you again," said Jack, greeting her on the driveway. "I'll put the kettle on."
Rhoda trailed Jack into the house, walking alongside Nate while Isaac ran on ahead.
"So, what have you got to do this afternoon?"
asked Nate. "Just take a few more photographs and check the fixings around the windows. They're cemented straight into the walls, so it can be more problematic removing them than had they been in wooden frames." She also wanted to have a poke around in the library of Telton Hall to see if she could find the Bible that had been mentioned, and ask Isaac to recite the names of the people in the photograph again, but she wasn't sure how she was going to do that yet. However, the opportunity presented itself as soon as she walked in the door. The hallway looked different, and immediately Rhoda noticed the bank of photographs had been taken down. Nate must have noticed her gaze.
"Ah, for some unknown reason, Dad has decided he needs to start packing. I came downstairs this morning to find he'd taken all the pictures off the wall and was stacking them in the study."
"Really? He's had a quick change of heart then."
"Surprisingly so."
"I'll come up to the chapel with you," said Jack, after they'd finished their drinks. "You don't have to do that," replied Rhoda. "I can nip up there on my own. It will be pretty boring just watching me take a few photographs."
"Nate will go with you then."
He looked towards his son.
"Take the quad. It will be quicker."
A few minutes later, Rhoda found herself climbing on the back of the quad bike Nate had brought out from one of the sheds.
"You are honoured," said Nate. "Not many people get the offer of the quad. Hold on tight."
Rhoda wasn't entirely sure what she was supposed to hold on tight to. There didn't appear to be any grips or handles. Nate twisted around to look over his shoulder.
"Sorry, that means holding on to me."
Rhoda tentatively put her hands on Nate's hips, whereupon he moved them up to his waist.
"I don't want you falling off. Ready?"
"Ready." Rhoda didn't want to admit that she was slightly apprehensive about being on the back of the quad bike, and she was grateful that Nate took it slowly as he eased away and headed towards the gateway. Instead of taking the footpath up the side of the field directly in front of them, Nate steered the bike around the edge of the field and took a route up the west side of the hill, which was considerably less steep. All the same, she had to lean into him and was very conscious of the closeness of their bodies. Nate unlocked the chapel for her and wandered around while Rhoda took the photographs she needed and made some extra notes. "It's going to take a bit longer to get the windows out, as they are fixed straight into the plaster," she said.
"How do you get the window out?"
asked Nate, coming to stand beside her. "We take it out in sections. See those bars running across the windows? They keep the glass in place. There are wires soldered onto the lead, which are then wrapped around the poles. Each window is done in sections, so it's a case of taking one section out at a time."
"Sounds tricky."
"Yes, it's probably the trickiest part, especially when dealing with fixings like this one, which aren't in a frame. At least with a wooden frame, we can take it out in one piece and then deal with each section once it's safely on a workbench."
"Rather you than me."
Rhoda's attention was caught by one of the glass panels in the bottom right-hand corner. She zoomed in on it with her camera. "Oh, wow," she muttered to herself. Completely lost in what she was doing, she moved closer, taking several more photographs.
"What is it?"
Nate came to stand beside her.
"What's wow?"
"The glass," said Rhoda, lowering her camera. "It's engraved in the corner with the name Paolo Sartori. That's our glazier." She brought the digital image up on the camera screen and showed it to Nate. "I assume your dad never paid much attention to the glass. Although, to be fair, it can't really be seen from down here."
"I guess a lot of people have missed it,"
said Nate, examining the image.
"It's not mentioned online."
"Perhaps you should arrange for that to be rectified." Rhoda fixed Nate with her gaze. He nodded.
"Yeah, maybe I should."
"Right, well, I'm done here," said Rhoda, breaking the moment. She put her camera in her bag, looking over to where the slabs had been dug up by the forensics team.
"It's still bothering you, isn't it?" said Nate.
"Yes, it is." She walked over to the side of the chapel, where the paving slabs had been stacked against the wall, revealing the shallow grave below. "Aren't you at all bothered, or even just curious?"
"You probably won't believe me when I say it's been playing on my mind, but there's nothing that can be done."
Nate checked his watch.
"Better head back and make sure Dad and Isaac are okay."
The quad bike ride down to Telton Hall was uneventful, and soon they were back outside the building. The sun was lower in the sky now, dipping behind the tall silver birch trees to the west and casting long shadows across the front of Telton Hall. The air felt cooler, and a chill breeze curled around Rhoda's neck. There was a strange silence in the air. A sudden flapping of wings and a squawk, as a bird flew out from the branches of the nearby trees, had Rhoda spinning around to see a magpie disappear out of sight.
"One for sorrow," said Nate,
nodding in the direction of the trees.
"We have quite a few magpies around here."
"Isn't it at this point I'm supposed to look around for a second one? 2 for joy and all that?"
"If you're that way inclined."
"I'm not," replied Rhoda, as she walked into Telton Hall. "I don't believe in luck. You make your own luck."
"Maybe so,"
replied Nate.
"But I think there are different types of luck. The luck you make yourself and the luck that you have from other people. I'm lucky in business because I've worked hard. That's the luck I've made myself. I'm also lucky to have Isaac in my life. He makes me feel lucky. Haven't you got someone in your life who makes you feel like that?"
Rhoda stopped inside the hallway and looked directly at Nate. "I don't, as it happens." Nate eyed her for a moment, not breaking contact.
"Maybe you just haven't met them yet."
That sounds like a line from a cheesy love song. Rhoda found herself breaking eye contact, not something she was given to doing, but Nate was digging too deep for her liking. "I need to use the bathroom."
"Yeah, of course. Use the one on the first floor. Up the stairs, turn left, and it's the first door on your right. I'll put the kettle on. Would you like to stay for supper? I'm asking you this now, before my dad pulls me up for not inviting you. Anyway, no pressure. Let me know in a minute."
Nate strode off down the hallway, his footsteps echoing around the sweeping staircase of Telton Hall, as Rhoda made her way up the red-carpeted stairs. The fabric was a little threadbare in places, and she wondered how many feet had tramped this way over the years. Had the man found at the chapel walked up here? She reached the landing and located the bathroom. It was larger than her bedroom at her flat, with a roll-top Victorian bath and high-level toilet cistern. There were 2 china sinks with painted flowers around the edge. It reminded Rhoda of a plush ladies' restroom at a top London restaurant. When she stepped back out onto the landing a couple of minutes later, she noticed the door on the other side of the hallway was open. It looked like a library, or perhaps a study. She could see a bank of bookcases lining the far wall. There was a large oval table in the centre and several stacks of what looked like picture frames. No, wait. They were photo frames. She recognised them from last week. They must be the ones Jack had taken down. She gave a quick glance up and down the hallway to make sure no one was about, before slipping through the open door and into the room. There was a desk in front of a large window which overlooked the driveway. An old-fashioned rotary-dial telephone was on the corner of the desk, and a diary and a fountain pen were laid out. There was a leather Chesterfield sofa to one side, with a rectangular coffee table in front of it. Another bank of bookcases stood against the wall behind the sofa. Rhoda went over to the table. These were definitely the photographs from downstairs. Trying not to clatter the frames against one another or on the table, she sifted through until she found the one she was looking for. It was of Mrs. Hartwell, Jack's mother, and the children standing in front of Telton Hall. Rhoda took her phone from her bag and snapped a couple of pictures. She turned the frame over and was pleased to see it hadn't been sealed with brown tape, as a lot of old photographs often were. Her hands were shaking, but she prized open the clips, which kept the backing card in place, and opened it up. She wanted to see the reverse of the photo, to see if anyone had written on the back. Bingo. They had. In traditional cursive writing, the names had been listed. Rhoda didn't have time to study it, but quickly took a photo of it with her phone. Then she spotted the picture of the POWs. She felt it was important and wondered if that, too, had been written on the back. She was delighted to see it had been, and took another photograph before replacing the backing card. Her pulse was racing. She really should get back, but she desperately wanted to search the bookcases for the family Bible. She took a deep breath. She could make another excuse to visit the bathroom.
"What do you think you're doing in here?"
Nate's voice was clipped and ice-cold as he stood in the doorway, staring at her. Rhoda fumbled the photo frame she was trying to put back together, and it clattered onto the table. She silently swore to herself. How was she going to explain this? Nate strode across the room and picked up the photograph, silently replacing it in the frame. "I'm sorry," began Rhoda, still not sure how to explain herself.
"You only had to ask," said Nate.
At that point, Isaac came into the room. "You found her! We've been looking for you," he said to Rhoda. "We're going to have spaghetti bolognese. Dad said he'd asked you to stay for tea. You are staying, aren't you?"
I don't think,"
began Rhoda, before Nate cut in.
"No, she's not. Rhoda was just telling me how she had to get back to Sussex and was about to leave."
Rhoda wanted to shrivel up and die, right there on the spot, like the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz. "Sorry," she said to Isaac. She glanced at Nate. "Sorry. I'll just say bye to your dad."
"Don't bother. I'll tell him you had to leave suddenly,"
came the terse reply.
"Okay, sure."
Rhoda shuffled past Nate. She could feel her face burning with embarrassment.
"I'll see myself out. Bye, Isaac."
She slunk away down the stairs, cursing herself for trying to be so sneaky. She should have just asked Nate in the first place. As she reached her car, something made her look up towards the study window. Nate was standing there, looking down at her. Crikey, those eyes bore heavily into her. In fact, the whole building felt like a weight of oppression on her, and she was glad to be accelerating down the driveway a few moments later and away from Telton Hall. Chapter 15. Alice, 1945. Alice had been at Telton Hall for a week and was gradually getting into a routine. Mrs. Hartwell liked everyone up early to feed the small assortment of farm animals. Alice's job was to collect the eggs. Lily had to feed the animals with the help of 2 of the Italian POWs, while Billy saw to the 2 heavy horses. It was only then they could all sit down for breakfast before the rest of the working day continued. "Come on, out of the way, you silly old chickens," said Alice, as she shooed the hens from the roosting boxes. The eggs were warm in her hand as she placed them into the basket. She was getting used to the smell of the poultry, although this morning it was particularly strong. She shooed another hen out of the way, and as she did so, the smell hit her hard. Turning her head away, she groped around for the eggs, only to feel something warm and runny on her fingers. Chicken poo. Alice gagged and rushed out of the chicken shed, gasping for fresh air and choking at the same time. The sound of laughter made Alice look up. Across the yard, leaning against the wall to the pigsty, was Billy. So far, Alice had managed to avoid having any contact with him other than at the breakfast table. Even then, she didn't like the way he looked at her over his mug of tea, but tried hard not to let him realise her discomfort.
"You want to try working with these 2? He called. "Chicken shit is like smelling roses compared to pig shit."
Alice nodded and gave a brief smile. She took another deep lungful of air and went back into the shed, wiping the muck from her hand with some straw. A moment later, the door opened and Billy stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the breaking dawn.
"Need some help?" he asked.
"No, I'm fine. Thank you anyway." Alice opened the wire inside door into the main chicken pen, closing it behind her.
"I expect in your condition it's not very nice being in here."
Alice stiffened at his comment. So far, no one at Telton Hall had spoken directly to her about her pregnancy, and Billy was the last person she wanted to discuss it with. She regained her composure and moved on to the next nesting box. "I don't mind it," she said, focusing on collecting the eggs.
"I could get you doing something nicer," said Billy. "Like in the kitchen or in the garden. Wouldn't you prefer that?"
He moved into the shed now, standing at the internal door. "As I said, I don't mind this. I'll do whatever Mrs. Hartwell tells me to."
"Whereabouts are you from?"
"Suffolk," replied Alice cautiously.
"Not much happening there, I don't imagine."
Alice felt unnecessarily irritated by the comment. "Plenty to do, actually." Billy gave a smirk, and once again his eyes flicked to her stomach.
"I stand corrected."
"To be honest, there doesn't seem much to do here either. Just another English village."
"You're right, and I can't wait to get away from here."
Billy gave a sigh.
"As soon as this war is over, I'm off."
"Where are you going?" "Don't tell me. London. Isn't that where everyone goes?" She was aware she was mocking him slightly, but she got the distinct impression he was just bragging and trying to impress her.
"As a matter of fact, I want to go to America."
"What's so good about America, then?" Alice thought of Brett and the life she had imagined for herself when they were married. Part of that fantasy was living in America, but that wasn't going to happen now.
"Everything is better over there. More opportunities, more money, more of everything. I'm not going to sit around here and waste my life feeding pigs."
Billy opened the door to let Alice out.
"Here, let me take that for you."
"I can manage. Thank you, though." Alice kept the basket between herself and Billy as she slipped through and hurried out of the shed. The bright sunshine blinded her momentarily, and she paused to squint and adjust to the light. It was then she noticed one of the POWs watching her. He was standing at the manure pile, pitchfork in one hand and the wheelbarrow by the side. He didn't say anything, just looked at her, then flicked his gaze to the shed and back to her again. Alice looked away, unsure what to make of the POW. More than once, over breakfast the past week, Billy had made his feelings known about the Germans and Italians. He didn't just hate them, he detested them with a passion, and never missed an opportunity to say so. Twice she'd heard him shouting at the POWs, telling them what they'd done wrong on the farm, and threatening to have them sent back to the prison camp. Alice hurried on through the garden gate and down the path towards the kitchen. She wished she didn't have to be there, but she had no choice. "Hello, Alice." It was Jack, Mrs. Hartwell's son. "Hello, Jack," said Alice. "You're up early. Did you wet the bed?" "No," cried Jack. "I don't do anything like that. I'm not a baby." Alice laughed and ruffled Jack's hair. "I'm only joking. That's what my dad used to say if I ever got up early. Here, help me put these eggs in the pantry." Alice liked Jack. She quite often found him hanging around, with not much to do. He wanted to help out in the fields, but Billy was adamant he was too young, despite Mrs. Hartwell thinking otherwise.
"I'm not having him on the tractor with me," Billy had said the previous evening. "There's nothing for him to do. He'll just be in the way."
Alice couldn't help feeling sorry for the boy, and they had struck up an unlikely alliance. Breakfast passed without incident, or comment from Billy, for which Alice was grateful. She cleared away the plates as the kitchen gradually emptied, and everyone went about their way, until it was just her, Mrs. Hartwell, and Jack left. "Jack, would you bring some logs in from the shed and fill up the baskets in the dining room and living room, please?" asked Mrs. Hartwell. "I've done that already," replied Jack. "Just bring a few extra up anyway," said Mrs. Hartwell. "Mind you don't bring any spiders in, though, won't you?" said Alice, flicking the tea towel in Jack's direction as he nipped out through the kitchen door. Alice, I wanted to have a quick word with you, said Mrs. Hartwell.
Of course,
replied Alice, racking her brains to think what she might have done wrong.
It's all right. Don't look so worried. It's good news, in fact.
Mrs. Hartwell smiled encouragingly. I've been put in touch with a young couple from Bath, Mr. and Mrs. Eggers, who are looking to adopt a baby. Alice's hand automatically went to her stomach. Already? Yes, I was surprised, but it's wonderful that we may have found a couple so soon. There was the reassuring smile again. They would like to meet you.
Meet me? Why? Is that normal?
Alice felt a surge of panic. If she met this couple, then it would make everything that was happening very real.
It's not usual, I'll admit, replied Mrs. Hartwell.
But they are a young, broad-minded couple, and I assume they want to get the measure of you.
A young couple? Why isn't he away fighting?
He's a doctor, and working in a London hospital.
But it seems so soon. I really think you should agree to meet them.
Mrs. Hartwell glanced out of the window. Jack's coming back. I don't want to talk about it in front of him. Alice bit her bottom lip. She didn't know what to say. Part of her didn't want to meet them, because if she did, she would have to face up to everything. Since arriving at Telton Hall, she had pretended to herself that giving up the baby wasn't really happening. Her heart ached at just the thought. She hadn't wanted to acknowledge what lay ahead, as it was too painful to dwell on. But, on the other hand, would it be easier for her if she was confident the child was going to be well looked after, and, most importantly, the child was going to be loved? Alice fought back the tears that filled her eyes and blurred her vision as she mumbled "Yes, that's good. I think it's the right thing to do, dear. Now, don't let Jack see you crying." Mrs. Hartwell opened the back door to allow Jack through with his armful of logs. "Have they got other children?" Alice asked, once Jack was out of earshot. "No, for some reason they haven't been able to have any. Does it make a difference?" Alice fiddled with the edge of the tea towel. "Not really, but I'm glad they haven't. It means that they will really love my baby and won't have to spread their love around." Mrs. Hartwell gave a sympathetic smile. "I know it's hard, Alice, but try not to think of the baby as yours. I know my words sound cruel and harsh, but I have your best interests at heart. If you think of the baby just as a baby, and once you've met Mr. and Mrs. Eggers, if you can think of it as theirs, it will help you when you have to part with it." Alice knew Mrs. Hartwell meant well, she truly did, but the whole idea hurt so much. It was a physical pain. It was the same sort of pain she'd experienced when her mother had died. A deep, sharp stab to the heart that made her stomach turn and her legs weak. It hurt so badly she wanted to double up and collapse in a heap on the floor. She held on to the side of the sink to steady herself as the realization of what she had to do fully hit her. She had to prepare herself to give up the baby. Oh, how wicked and guilty she felt already at just the thought. "Are you all right, Alice?" Mrs. Hartwell's voice was full of concern. "Yes, I'm fine," said Alice quickly. "I just need some fresh air." "You should sit down." "No, honestly, I'd sooner go outside." Alice dropped the tea towel onto the counter and exited the kitchen before Mrs. Hartwell could say anything else. She paused at the coal shed, leaning against the concrete bunker. After a few long, slow breaths, the lightheadedness passed. Alice made her way along the brick path, which ran a direct route from the back door of Telton Hall to the gate in the wall at the end of the garden. Several paths spurred off on the left and right, giving access to the raised beds. Once she was on the other side of the gate, Alice gave way to the tears she had struggled to hold back. She slumped down against the brick wall and brought her knees up, burying her head in her arms. "Va tutto bene?" The voice startled Alice. She had thought she was alone. She looked up, and one of the POWs was standing in front of her. He was brandishing a knife in his hand. Alice got to her feet, her back still pinned against the wall. "Stay away," she said. It sounded dramatic to her ears, but she was panicking. Va tutto bene, the man repeated, and followed up in English. Are you all right? He took a step closer, but then stopped. Alice gestured to the knife. Stay away from me, she repeated, as she sidestepped towards the gate, her back still against the wall. Non aver paura. Then he looked down, and must have realized he was holding the knife. He threw the knife to the ground and held out his hands, palms up. Do not be scared. However, Alice wasn't taking any chances. She raced through the gate, crashing it shut behind her, and ran down the path, stopping only when she saw Billy in the kitchen doorway, smoking a cigarette.
Oh, you look a scared little bunny, he said. What's the matter?
Nothing, said Alice. I'm fine. Billy looked beyond her towards the end of the garden.
Something happened with one of those eye ties.
Alice stiffened at the casual insult. You mean the Italians? No, nothing's happened. She was buggered if she was going to tell Billy anything. Besides, in the few seconds she had scurried down the path, she'd had time to register that the POW had dropped the knife as soon as he realised he was holding it. She had probably, almost certainly, overreacted. Brushing past Billy, because he wouldn't move out of the way, Alice went back to the kitchen. She was pleased Mrs. Hartwell wasn't there anymore. Alice didn't want to face her right now. Cook had arrived and was preparing something on the range. Hello, Alice, my dear. She paused and gave Alice an old-fashioned look. You all right? You look like you've been crying. I'm fine. Alice forced a smile to her face. You don't fool me, Miss Renshaw, said Cook. It's probably your condition. Does things like that to you. Makes you a bit more emotional. She gave Alice a warm smile. Alice shouldn't have been surprised Cook knew about the pregnancy. It wasn't as if Alice was the first girl to come to Telton Hall. Still, Cook's casual, not judgmental, comment did come a little unexpectedly. I didn't realise you knew. Well, you're not the first girl who's in trouble to come this way. Mrs. Hartwell's a decent woman and likes to help other women, especially youngsters like yourself. You couldn't have come to a better place. My dad arranged for me to come here, said Alice. He works for Mrs. Hartwell's sister. The father stood me up at the altar. Again, you're not the first. Cook tore the top sheet from a notepad. Now, I usually get one of the prisoners to do this, but today you get the honour. That way I can keep an eye on you. She handed over a list. It's the veg I need for tonight's dinner. Alice took the list, grateful the conversation had moved on. She was on the verge of tears again, and this wasn't like her at all. Cook was right. It was all to do with being pregnant. All the same, Alice didn't like the overwhelming emotions that she had no control over. Will Mrs. Hartwell mind me doing this? Of course not. Besides, it's my kitchen. No one interferes with that. She winked at Alice. Now run along. Oh, no, don't run. Best you just walk. Alice was glad there was no sign of Billy when she went back into the garden. She hated the way he appeared and disappeared like a spectre. It made her uneasy to think she could just turn around and he'd be there. He'd probably gone off to pester some other poor soul. With the list in her hand, Alice headed for the vegetable part of the garden. Cook wanted new potatoes and spring cabbage. Alice had to admit, since being at Telton Hall, her diet had very much improved. As she picked up the fork to turn up some potatoes, she thought of her dad and had an unexpected surge of sympathy for him. He was all on his own now, with no one to cook for him or wash his clothes, or to make him a cup of tea when he got in from work. She hoped he was all right and was looking after himself. The ground was harder to dig than Alice had expected, and she gave a grunt as she tried to lift up one of the potato plants to get to the roots. The gate opened, and in came the Italian she'd run away from earlier, pushing a wheelbarrow of horse manure ahead of him. He saw Alice and immediately put the wheelbarrow down. Sorry, he said in English. I did not mean to frighten you. Alice nodded. It's fine. My name is Paolo Sartori. He held out his hand, and then must have thought better of it, for he pulled it back quickly. Alice gave a small laugh. She held out her hand, realizing that even though the prisoners ate their meals with them, she knew none of their names. Alice Renshaw. The Italian looked surprised, but pleased, and accepted the gesture of the handshake. Pleased to make your acquaintance. It sounded very formal and funny to Alice's ears, especially with the Italian accent. Nice to meet you. They stood in an awkward silence for a moment before Paolo nodded towards the fork. I help you? Alice went to say no, but something stopped her. She felt he was trying to apologise and make up for scaring her. To say no to his offer would be like shunning his apology. She planted the fork into the soil and stepped back, holding one arm out in the direction of the fork. Be my guest. He looked confused. She smiled. Please. The prisoner came over and swiftly dug up the plant, plucking the potatoes from the roots, shaking off the excess soil and dropping them into the basket Alice had brought with her.
Hey, what's going on?
Alice groaned inwardly at the sight of Billy limping his way up the path. He's helping me, she called back. Paolo stood up, pushing the fork into the freshly turned soil. He looked guardedly from Alice to Billy.
He's got his own work to do,
said Billy, coming to a halt in front of them. He wagged his stick in the direction of the POW.
Get back to what you're supposed to be doing, spreading this shit about.
For a horrible moment, Alice thought Paolo was going to object. Thank you for your help, she said. She wanted to apologise for Billy being so embarrassing, but it wouldn't help Billy's temper, and ultimately wouldn't help Paolo. I asked him to help me. Making her point again, she looked directly at Billy and stood as tall as she could. In fact, I told him to help me. Billy glared at the prisoner.
He should know better. Go on, clear off.
He jabbed his walking stick into the Italian's upper arm. The other man hesitated for the briefest of moments before going back to his wheelbarrow. Billy turned to Alice.
If you want help, ask me. I'll always oblige. Stay away from these prisoners. I'll see he's punished for this.
What do you mean, punished? Alice was horrified.
They have to be kept in line, especially these young ones who get to stay on the farm. If I had my way, they'd all go back to the camp and be locked up for the night. It's only because Louise is a soft touch that they're here at all. They should all be bloody shot, if you ask me.
They are human beings and deserve to be treated properly.
They are prisoners of war. They'd no sooner slit your throat if you didn't keep them in line. That one will be going without his lunch today. A little reminder who is in charge around here.
That's cruel. You can't do that. I'm sure there's a law against it. Alice was horrified that she had got Paolo's rations cut. He was helping, which is what he's here for.
I didn't tell him to do that, though.
Billy sighed, and his face softened.
Maybe I've been a bit hasty. You don't know the rules, I suppose, and I wouldn't want you to think I'm an unreasonable man.
He moved closer to Alice.
As a favour to you, I'll make sure he gets his lunch. I'll let him off this time. How does that sound?
Good. It sounds good, said Alice, very much aware of how close Billy was standing. Right, well, I'd better get back to gathering the veg for cook. Billy smiled.
Yes, best do that. I'll see you later, Alice.
Alice didn't reply or look up from the list she was making a big deal out of studying. She could hear the uneven plod of Billy's departing footsteps. Chapter 16. Nate, 2022. Nate had wanted to kick himself by the time Rhoda's car had reached the end of the drive. He had overreacted and been pretty disingenuous, to the point of being pompous. What harm was she doing, looking at the photos? None, as it happened. He had just been angry that she hadn't asked him. He would have been quite happy for her to do so. He knew the remains up at the chapel had struck a chord with her, and it had bothered him that she was so upset about it. After looking through the Facebook page for her missing brother, it had given him an insight into just how important it was to her, and he appreciated how the discovery at the chapel must be making her feel. He wanted to help her in some way, but didn't know how. And now he'd made a right dick of himself by sending her away with a flea in her ear. The whole scenario had bothered him all the previous night and all of Sunday. So much so that by the time it came to taking Isaac home to Siobhan, he'd decided the only way to resolve things was to contact Rhoda directly. He didn't have her personal number, but he had the number of the museum, and he would call her first thing in the morning to apologise.
"You look as if you've lost a tenner and found a pound," said Jack, as Nate came downstairs with Isaac's bags to load up in the car. "I was just thinking about all this business with the chapel." His dad gave a shrug. "There's not much to think about, is there? The chapel is destined to be taken down and moved." "I meant the remains." "Nothing to worry about there, either. No case to investigate." "I thought they may at least try to find out a bit more," admitted Nate. "I know they haven't officially closed the case, but it's not one they're going to spend any significant time on, if any. Shepard made that perfectly clear." "Why would they want to? They've got better things to think about."
His father took off his reading glasses.
"Anyway, I thought you weren't bothered about it. Having second thoughts? Nothing to do with a certain young lady from West Sussex, is it?"
Nate flicked his father a glance.
"Of course not."
He was blowed if he was going to admit anything like that to his father. He was having a hard time admitting it to himself.
"I need to get going."
He stepped out into the hallway and called up the stairs.
"Isaac, time to go."
The house phone in the hallway rang, and Nate picked it up.
"Hello, Telton Hall."
"Oh, hello. Is that you, Nate? It's Aggie."
"Hello, Aggie. Everything okay?"
His father had never promoted his phone to a cordless one, so Nate leaned as far as he could into his father's line of sight, and with his hand over the speaker, informed him who was calling. "Yes, everything is fine. I didn't realise you were still there," Aggie continued. "I won't keep you. Tell your father to call me when he gets a moment."
"I can put him on now if you want."
No, it's fine. Goodbye, dear." Aggie abruptly hung up. Nate went into his father.
"Aggie said, can you call her when you get a moment? She didn't want to talk now for some reason." Will do."
Aggie and Nate's dad had always been close growing up, and were more like brother and sister than cousins. Their great friendship had continued throughout their lives. Nate had often wondered what it would be like to have a sibling, and whether he'd missed out on something. Once again, his thoughts landed right back at Rhoda and her relationship with her twin brother. How, despite what Nate imagined was a difficult and perhaps estranged upbringing, it mattered deeply to Rhoda that she knew what had happened to Dean. Nate woke earlier than usual the following morning and had a moment of unexplained sensation that something important was happening that day. Then he remembered. He needed to speak to Rhoda and apologise for the way he'd spoken to her. In the cold light of day, and after a couple of nights' sleep, he felt even more ashamed of himself. Once he'd showered, dressed, and made himself a strong black coffee, Nate opened the Facebook app on his phone and went straight to Dean Sullivan's page. There had been no new information from the last time he looked. Nate checked the last post Rhoda had made on the page. There was no profile picture, just a graphic of a white silhouette of a person's head and shoulders against a grey background. The standard avatar for someone who hadn't posted a profile picture. Nate entered Rhoda's name into the search bar. It turned out there were rather more Rhoda Sullivans than he expected. The list went on for 2 pages. Nate scanned the profile pictures until he found the anonymous avatar and then clicked on it, whereupon he was taken to her Facebook page. There were no pictures, no contact details, and one solitary post which redirected people to the Dean Sullivan Missing Person page. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find out about Rhoda, but he was intrigued by her and what made her tick. He wondered if she had a business page at all for her stained glass work, but checking his watch, he knew he didn't have time to look. He closed the app and slipped the phone into his pocket, at the same time scoffing at himself for acting like some sort of MI5 agent trying to discover the secret identity of a spy. He got to the office at 8:15, like he always did. It was too early to call the museum. He assumed they wouldn't open until at least 9 o'clock, or even 10, so there was no point trying to get hold of Rhoda just yet. His first call, as always, was to Isaac. It was a routine they had in the morning. In the 5 years they had been living apart, Nate hadn't forgotten once, no matter where he was in the world or what he was doing.
Hi, Isaac. You okay? Mum said we did my homework wrong.
Well, that was a good start to the conversation.
We did? I thought we did good. What was wrong? It wasn't on her list of ideas.
Isaac seemed unfazed by it, so Nate tried to adopt the same attitude.
It's okay to have your own ideas. I expect your teacher will like it.
He could hear Siobhan talking in the background.
Mum wants to speak to you. I've got to go. Okay, mate. See you Wednesday after chess club.
Hello, Nate.
Siobhan.
Just wanted to clarify the conversation I had with Isaac about his project. All I said was, I was surprised to see what he'd done, as it wasn't what I was expecting.
That's cool. Don't worry.
I thought he might do something a little more academic, she continued. But he seems happy with the photographs. Nate wasn't entirely sure where the conversation was heading, but it seemed a lot of fuss about a school project.
Sometimes it's good to explore other mediums, he settled for as an answer.
Siobhan didn't sound especially convinced. He was talking a lot about someone called Rhoda. You took him to meet her and then she came back with you both to Telton Hall. I'm not saying you can't have a girlfriend, or that Isaac can't meet them.
I'm pleased to hear that,
Nate interrupted, now fully aware of where the conversation was going. For nothing more than his own amusement, he allowed Siobhan to carry on. I'm just saying, I think you should have told me first, so I could at least be prepared for Isaac talking about her. I was totally in the dark. He knew more than I did. She was in full flow. If it's a new relationship, you might want to take things easy. I'm not sure Isaac should be meeting a new person in your life unless it's already on a stable footing. Nate, are you listening to me? I'm not being unreasonable.
No, I completely agree with what you're saying.
There was a small silence. Right. So why didn't I know?
Because there's nothing to know. She works for the museum that is taking the chapel from the farm. She came over on a business visit. Isaac was interested in the museum, so I took him. There's nothing to tell.
Really?
Yes, really. Now I've got to go. Have a good day, Siobhan.
He hung up without waiting for her to reply. It had been a bit of a childish sport, but sometimes she was so intense, it reminded him of their married days, which wasn't a great way to start the working week. Nate kept himself occupied for the next 90 minutes or so, going through a complex set of accounts for one of his clients, although he kept finding himself clock-watching. At 10 o'clock, he was on the phone to the museum and was relieved when Rhoda accepted his call from the receptionist.
Hi, Rhoda. It's me, Nate Hartwell.
Yes, they said. What can I do for you? She sounded very businesslike, and Nate knew he probably had his work cut out. He didn't imagine Rhoda as the kind of person who would just roll over and accept an apology from someone who had been so rude.
Firstly, I wanted to apologise, he began,
noting an unusual hesitancy to his voice.
I was very rude on Saturday evening, and I regretted it almost instantly.
Almost instantly?
By the time you were in your car, I knew I'd been an
arsehole?
Well, that's not what I was going for, but I guess if the cap fits, I should wear it.
He pitched for humour, but the telling silence told him his attempt was wide of the mark. This was harder than he'd imagined.
I am genuinely appalled by the way I spoke to you. I hope you can accept my apology. I won't try to make excuses because it's inexcusable.
In that case, apology accepted. Nate sat up in his chair.
Is it?
Yes. I was going to phone you myself today and apologise for snooping around when I shouldn't have been. I deserved to be kicked out.
Kicked out? Yes, that doesn't sound good. Sorry.
You were right. I should have asked first. Can't say I appreciate the way you did kick me out, and yes, that's definitely what happened. But let's forget about it now, seeing as we are both sorry. Nate was momentarily stunned into silence. He hadn't expected the conversation to go quite like this, but he appreciated Rhoda's directness.
That sounds good to me.
Perfect. There was another silence, and Rhoda spoke again. So, what was the other thing?
I wondered if there was anything I could do to help you find out who the body in the chapel was.
It appeared it was Rhoda's turn to be momentarily stunned. You really want to help me?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because I know it means a lot to you, for more than one reason. And I have to admit, I'm quite curious too.
It does mean a lot, you're right. She paused. And thank you for wanting to help.
Good. That's that sorted. Maybe we could meet up to discuss a plan of action?
I'm due back down to Somerset on Wednesday. Are you about in the afternoon for a chat?
Sorry, can't do Wednesday. I have Isaac midweek. He has chess club, so I pick him up from school at 4 o'clock.
That's nice you get to see him midweek too.
Yeah, every other weekend and every Wednesday, plus anything that crops up in between. I quite often do the after-school clubs and swimming, as it helps Siobhan out with her work.
What does she do?
Life guru.
What?
Yeah, it's probably not your thing, but apparently loads of people, women especially, like to get help organising their lives. Every aspect, in fact. Their health, work, parenting, mental health. If you need any help, Siobhan's your woman.
You might need to work on your sales technique there. I get the feeling you don't quite buy into it.
That obvious, huh?
Totally. He could hear the amusement in her voice, which made him smile.
I could meet you for lunch. I could drive over to the farm around midday.
He had a quick look at the digital diary as he spoke.
In fact, I could make it a long lunch.
He could shuffle a few things around, and if he came early, he could easily take the afternoon off work. That was the beauty of being his own boss. Okay, that sounds good. I'll look forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Nate finished the call and sat back in his chair, realising he was grinning rather more broadly than necessary. Chapter 17. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda looked at her notebook. She'd written down a list of questions to which she wanted answers concerning the body in the chapel, as she was now referring to it in her mind, which in a self-deprecating way made her feel like a modern-day Miss Marple. She went down the list. Double-check names of people in photo. Full names of the 2 girls in the photo. Where are they now? Ask Jack. If he doesn't know, try to find Family Bible at Telton Hall for details. Try to talk in person to any who are still alive. Try to find out if there was a record of POWs in Telton Hall. Try local sources first. Speak to older people in Telton Village. Does anyone remember someone going missing? It would do for starters, anyway. It wasn't dissimilar from how she had gone about first trying to find Dean. It was a case of methodically going through all the possibilities, making notes, cross-referencing, following up leads. Not that it had got her anywhere with Dean, but maybe she could do something for this man found in the chapel. Rhoda had been surprised when Nate had called her, and also pleased. She knew she'd been snooping when she shouldn't have been, but the inherent distrust of people that had organically grown inside her since childhood had got in the way. She knew that. She knew it was one of her faults, but it was hard to break a habit that was there as protection. Crikey, a psychiatrist would have a field day with her. Rhoda was well aware of the impact of her childhood on her adult life, but if she was honest, she had no desire to change anything. She was who she was. She was comfortable and secure with her adult self. Most of the time, anyway. And now it was Wednesday, and she had woken up with a belly full of butterflies at the excitement of heading down to Somerset later that morning to oversee the erection of the scaffolding in the chapel so the removal of the window could start. And secondly, she was looking forward to seeing Nate and discussing the body in the chapel. Rhoda had to go into work first, just to pick up some paperwork from the office that she needed to get the scaffolders to sign. Her boss had been late organising it, so she hadn't been able to collect it the day before, but she didn't mind. She also wanted to nip over to her studio and grab her camera. Morning, Rhoda. Nancy, who worked on reception at the museum, greeted her. Eric has left the paperwork with me. Thanks very much, Nancy. I'm just shooting over to the studio. Before you run off, said the receptionist, reaching over to the tray on her desk. Here's your post. Oh, post. I hope it's something nice. Not often I get post these days. It's all usually done electronically. Yes, I thought that myself. Oh, there's the phone. Excuse me. With the paperwork and envelope in her hand, Rhoda headed through reception and along the gravel pathway towards her studio. She waved to Jeff, one of the stable lads, as she went. Although, as he was well over 60, it was a hard push calling him a lad. It made Rhoda smile nonetheless. She popped the documents for the scaffolders into her bag, along with her camera and the letter, which she'd look at when she had more time. Rhoda arrived at Telton Hall just before midday, the traffic being far heavier than it had been on her previous trips. The scaffolders were already in the car park. You didn't have to wait, she said to the guy who had got out of the van to greet her. We would have got started, but the farmer has lost the key to the gate. Apparently, that's the only way up. He's lost the key? Is that what he said? Yep. Wait there a minute. I'll go and speak to him. Rhoda knocked on the front door of Telton Hall, and eventually Jack Hartwell opened the door to her. Ah, you made it. Yep, so it appears. Rhoda raised her eyebrows at Jack. Apparently you've lost the key to the gate. It's my age. I'm getting forgetful. Come on, Jack. You're as sharp as a pin. Look, there's no point holding things up. It won't make any difference. We need to get the scaffolding up so I can take the window out. Jack looked past her shoulder towards the scaffolders. I don't like it. I know you don't. And I'm sorry you're having to go through this, but honestly, there's no point being difficult now. Jack let out a long sigh. Some days I think I'll be well rid of the place. Other days I'm scared to leave it. Telton Hall is all I've ever known. His eyes glistened, and he clenched his jaw as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his nose. Rhoda instinctively rested her hand lightly on his arm. I know, Jack. I really do understand the mix of emotions you're feeling. It's only natural. It's not just what you're leaving behind, it's what's ahead of you too, especially when it's the unknown. Jack rooted around in his pocket again and pulled out a key. He handed it to Rhoda. You'd better let them in before someone snitches on me to Nate. Rhoda gave a gentle smile. Thanks, Jack. She unlocked the gate and gave the scaffolders instructions how to get up to the chapel from the other side of the hill, where it was less steep. Then she went back to Telton Hall to speak to Jack. All sorted? He asked. Yes, I'll have to go up there myself in a minute, but I wanted to have a quick word. That sounds ominous. You'd better come through. Rhoda followed him into the living room, where he took his usual position in his armchair, and she perched on the edge of the sofa. I don't mean to pry, and I know it's not my business, but I keep wondering what you're going to do for a home once Telton Hall is sold. Have you got somewhere to live yet? Has Nate put you up to this? No, not at all. I am genuinely concerned. Well, no, I don't, as it happens. If it comes to it, I can stay with my cousin Aggie across the road, but it's not ideal. She's not allowed to have someone there long term. There's a clause in her tenancy agreement preventing her having lodgers, which is what I'd be. Rhoda took a piece of paper from her bag and passed it over to Jack. Here's a list of some local housing associations that may be able to help you find somewhere. Also, there's the number for one of the housing officers. It's their direct line, and they've been given the heads up you're going to call. They might be able to help you." Jack looked at the piece of paper. Friends in high places, eh? Not by choice. Rhoda got up from the sofa. "I'd better go and see what those scaffolders are doing, especially as I'm going to be working off it." Rhoda left Jack and went up to the chapel. While she let the scaffolders get on with the job, she took the opportunity to sit down with her laptop and check her emails. She found herself drawn to the end of the pew, near to where the bones had been found. As she checked her emails on her phone, a draft tickled the back of her neck and caught a stray wisp of hair, which brushed against her face. She gave a shiver, and as she glanced around the chapel, she was grateful she wasn't alone. There was something about this place she didn't like, a similar sort of sensation to the one she'd got at Telton Hall the other day.
"Ah, there you are."
A voice from behind made Rhoda spin around in her seat. It was Nate. "Where else did you think I might be? Don't worry, I haven't been anywhere I shouldn't." The words came out a little more defensively than she'd planned, as images of her in the study looking at photos sprang immediately to her mind. Nate shrugged.
"I didn't think for 1 minute you had. Anyway, I thought we were over all that."
Rhoda closed her eyes for a moment as a bout of embarrassment washed over her. "Sorry, didn't mean to sound so touchy."
"So, we're still okay for a spot of lunch in the village?"
Rhoda stood up. "Absolutely." She gathered up her bag, and after checking with the scaffolders that they didn't need her, she left the chapel with Nate. The cafe in Telton Village overlooked the stream which ran through the village, and they bagged a table on the patio. It was warm enough to sit outside if you had a lightweight jacket on, which fortunately they both did. They ordered coffee and looked at the menus.
"I much prefer sitting outside," said Nate. "I spend enough time stuck indoors behind a desk."
"What do you do?"
"I'm an accountant. Got my own firm in town."
"So, if you grew up on a farm and prefer to be outside, what drew you to a life of numbers in an office?" Nate fiddled with his sugar spoon.
"I was adamant I didn't want to be tied to the farm. I'd seen Dad struggle year after year to make ends meet, to balance the books, to get up at the crack of dawn. He worked early mornings and long nights during harvest time, and growing up, we all had to do our bit."
"And that put you off?"
"Yeah. I've always been good with numbers, and it felt like the easy option, if I'm honest. Plus, it gave me a way out."
"Did you ever feel guilty about not taking over at the farm?" Nate eyed her steadily, saying nothing as the waiter came out onto the patio with their food. Nate had gone for scampi and chips, while Rhoda had opted for a jacket potato.
"This looks good,"
said Nate, picking up the salt. "It does. Didn't realise how hungry I was." Rhoda waited a moment before speaking again. "You didn't answer my question."
"Are you always this direct?"
"I try to be. That way there's no misunderstanding."
"Does that stem from your childhood?"
He popped a chip into his mouth. "You're avoiding the question." Nate sighed.
"If you must know, then yes. Not taking over the farm does make me feel guilty, but only because I know it's disappointed Dad. On the other hand, just as well I didn't. Otherwise, what with this CPO, I'd be out of a job and a home, just like him."
"I gave your dad a couple of phone numbers today," said Rhoda. "A local housing company, and someone in the council who could help."
"Someone in the council?"
"Yeah, I know a man who knows a man, sort of thing."
"Insider information?"
"Something like that." Rhoda concentrated on her food, aware that Nate was studying her again.
"So,"
said Nate, breaking the silence.
"The body in the chapel."
Rhoda was pleased with the turn of conversation. "Yes. You want to help?"
"If I can."
"I really need to see if anyone in the photos at Telton Hall are still alive, so I can speak to them, or at least find out what happened to them so they can be accounted for. Even the POWs, although that might not be so easy to do."
"Didn't the police already do that? They spoke to Aggie, and, of course, Dad."
"Yes, but there are the 2 other girls as well. I don't think the police even tried to trace them. Anyway, I'd like to speak to them myself. Sometimes people are wary of the police. They might be more open with me. Rhoda took her notebook from her bag and opened it up to her list of questions and action plan, before turning it around so Nate could see it. He took a moment to read it.
You've thought about this?
Of course.
And you're going to do it regardless of any help I can give you?
Of course.
I'd better help you then.
Rhoda felt a smile break across her face. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll have to tell my dad.
I know. I'm fine with that. I wouldn't want to deceive him. That would be disrespectful. Is there a ledger at all of the POWs and the people who came to Telton Hall?
There was mention of one years ago. I think maybe my mother was the last one to talk about it, but I'm pretty certain it's here somewhere.
That would be amazing if you could find it, said Rhoda.
When we go back to Telton Hall, we can have a quick look up in the study.
Rhoda had to try hard not to scoff her lunch down and appear overeager to get back to the house. She'd had an enjoyable hour or so and realised it had been a long time since she'd been out for a meal with anybody. In fact, as she finished her food and sipped her cup of tea, she was hard-pressed to remember when the last time was. She'd had a grand total of 3 boyfriends in her lifetime, the most recent being some time ago, when she'd finally admitted to herself she wasn't good at relationships.
Penny for your thoughts, said Nate.
They're really not worth even a penny.
You looked pretty far away there. I'd say it was a penny well invested.
Nate signalled the waiter for the bill. Rhoda picked up her bag and fished out her purse. Dutch. We'll go Dutch.
No, we won't, said Nate. I invited you out for lunch, so it's my shout. Put your purse away.
I insist, said Rhoda.
While you're in my home village, we'll do things my way.
Nate winked at her.
Please, let me.
I'd rather just split the bill. Nate shook his head.
Tell me what you were thinking just now, and you've got yourself a deal.
That's unfair.
I'm a country boy. I work with numbers. I like to barter. What can I say?
Nate took the bill from the waiter before he'd had time to put it on the table. Okay, said Rhoda reluctantly. Nate gave a satisfied smile. Once they'd left the cafe and were walking back along the high street, Nate prompted her.
Come on then, let's hear it.
It wasn't very exciting, said Rhoda reluctantly. I was just thinking it had been a long time since I'd been out for a meal with anyone.
That's it?
Pretty much.
And when was the last time? Persisted Nate.
A long time ago, Rhoda found herself confessing.
With a boyfriend?
Yes, if you must know, said Rhoda, feeling the burn of embarrassment hit her cheeks. I've not got a very good success rate when it comes to relationships. And just because I'm sure you're going to ask me, I'll save you the bother. I've come to the conclusion I'm better off on my own.
Wow, that sounds very harsh, writing yourself off at 28.
I'm quite happy, actually.
Are you?
Yes, I am. Rhoda met his gaze, irritated by the way the conversation had gone. What about you? You're on your own. Why haven't you got yourself a replacement? There was a flicker of hurt on his face, and for a split second, Rhoda was pleased. In the very next second, she was remorseful. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
It's okay. I'm getting used to your ways.
Which is far too outspoken, verging on rudeness, said Rhoda. I'm quoting that directly from one of my social worker reports.
Yeah, well, they don't know everything, even if they think they do,
Nate replied simply.
And just for the record, I haven't had the time or inclination to meet anyone else. I tried a couple of dates via a dating app, but my heart wasn't in it. My friends have given up trying to fit me up with their single girlfriends.
So, are you quite happy on your own too?
For the moment, but I wouldn't like to think I'll spend the rest of my life alone.
They walked on a little way in silence, but instead of carrying on to the end of the high street, Nate stopped at a junction.
We're going down here first.
We are?
There's someone you might like to meet.
Who's that?
Joyce Colburn. She's lived in Telton all her life. She used to run the post office when we had one. She might remember something.
Oh, do you think she will? How old is she? Rhoda couldn't deny the feeling of excitement.
I'm not sure, but she's older than Dad. Maybe around Aggie's age?
Did the police speak to her, do you know?
I don't, but we'll soon find out.
Nate headed down the side road and came to a halt outside a small stone cottage, with honeysuckle clambering over a wooden archway. The front garden was bordered by a wall and was filled to the brim with tubs and pots to display the glorious selection of plants and shrubs.
Believe it or not, this actually used to be the post office itself, before it moved into the convenience shop about 25 years ago.
And you're going to tell me you could buy a bag full of sweets for 10 bob, or something like that, teased Rhoda.
Hey, I'm not that old, said Nate, with mock indignation. But yeah, I do remember when a bar of chocolate was about 20 pence.
He rang the bell to the cottage. How old are you? Rhoda asked, as they stood on the doorstep.
37. Why's that?
No reason, just wondering. The front door opened as far as the chain would allow, and an elderly lady with permed white hair and blue-rimmed glasses eyed them through the opening.
What do you want? Hello, Mrs. Colburn. It's me, Nathan Hartwell, Jack Hartwell's son from Telton Hall.
Ah, so it is. Just a minute. The door closed and then reopened a few seconds later, minus the safety chain. Joyce looked Rhoda up and down. Nate introduced her.
This is Rhoda Sullivan. She works at the museum who are buying the chapel.
Oh, yes, I heard all about that. Nasty business, that. A body? Well, I never. More of a skeleton, said Rhoda. Human bones.
That's actually why we've come to see you, said Nate. We're keen to try to find out the identity of the remains. The police haven't got the time or resources to look into it, so we thought we'd do a bit of sleuthing.
Rhoda wasn't sure if she liked it described as sleuthing, but she let the comment pass. Nathan, tells me you've lived here all your life, said Rhoda, wanting to get to the point. That's right. You don't remember anyone going missing from Telton Hall around the time of the war, do you? Maybe one of the farm workers, or even a prisoner? That's a long time ago. Joyce frowned as she thought back. I don't remember anyone going missing. That's not to say they didn't. I just can't recall. A lot's happened since then. She gave a chuckle.
Do you remember any of the people who lived at Telton Hall around that time? Did you know any of them? Asked Nate.
Well, there was Mrs. Hartwell, your grandmother. She used to take in girls who needed somewhere to stay for a while, said Joyce, lowering her voice. Girls who'd got into a bit of trouble. I was only a youngster myself. We didn't much mix with the girls from Telton Hall. It wasn't encouraged. I think our parents thought their ways would rub off on us. That's not to say we always did as we were told. Rhoda felt hope dip and rise almost simultaneously. Do you remember any girls by the name of Lily or Alice? Joyce directed her reply to Nate. You should be asking your aunt. She was up there a lot. She'd know.
We're going to speak to Aggie, said Nate. We were in the village, so we thought we'd call by.
That was news to Rhoda, but she was glad Nate had already thought about speaking to his aunt. You know, I think I do remember an Alice. She came to the post office one day, wanting a stamp for Italy. Italy, of all places. I remember now. My father was the postmaster, and there was an argument. He called her a traitor. That's right, it's coming back to me. I didn't really know then what it was all about. I know she never came into the post office after that, and I remember my father saying, good riddance to bad rubbish.
Was this during the war or after? Asked Nate.
I'm sorry, I don't really know. But it must be either the end of the war or later, when we still had Italian POWs. What happened to Alice? Asked Rhoda. Did she move on from Telton Hall? I don't suppose you remember her surname, do you? Well, funny you should ask. I do, as it happens. It's just come back to me. Joyce looked very proud of herself. Renshaw. Alice Renshaw. Renshaw, repeated Rhoda. That's wonderful, thank you. I can hear my father now as clear as day, saying, that Renshaw girl should go back to where she came from. Nothing but trouble, that one. Funny how things stick in your head. My father was a very patriotic man, didn't much care for the prisoners.
I always got the impression most people in the village accepted them, said Nate.
I think most people did, but like I said, my father was very patriotic, and he always thought of them as the enemy, even when the war was over and they were still here. You should see if you can find the parish records. There might be something in there about them. I do remember a couple of them coming to church on Sundays. Apart from that, I don't really remember much else.
You've been really helpful, said Rhoda. We've got a surname, which is more than we had before. Thank you so much. Can I leave you my number in case anything else springs to mind? Asked Nate.
Of course, but don't get your hopes up. It was a long time ago. Thanking Joyce, Rhoda and Nate left to return to Telton Hall.
Thank you so much, said Rhoda. That was genius of you. It might trigger some more memories. And we've got a surname. I can look Alice Renshaw up in the archives. How do you think it will help to identify the remains, though? I'm not sure, but we've got to start somewhere. What if she's still alive? She might be able to tell us something. She might know if the other girl, Lily, is still alive. Of course, your aunt may be able to shed some light too. Basically, we need as much information from as many people as possible. Although Rhoda was excited at the thought, she knew from bitter experience not to get her hopes up. All the same, she was eager to try to find Alice Renshaw. They arrived at Telton Hall as the scaffolders were pulling through the gate from the hill. I just need to have a quick word, she said. Sure, I'll be up in the study having a look for those books, said Nate, carrying on into the house. All done, said one of the scaffolders. Let us know when you want it taken down. I was told you need about 2 weeks, is that right? Yeah, should be able to get it all done by then, said Rhoda. After that, we'll need more scaffolding to take the building down, but I think my boss is going to arrange all that with you. Okie doke, we'll get off now. Rhoda watched the truck trundle down the driveway. 2 weeks. That's all she had to find out about the remains in the chapel. After that, she'd have no legitimate reason to be here. She wasn't on the team for taking the chapel down and moving it to the museum. Once the windows were out and all marked up, her work here would be over. She quickened her step as she crunched across the gravel up to the front door. Folding the paperwork the scaffolders had given her, she opened her bag and slipped it in. As she did so, she noticed the envelope that had been sent to her at the museum. She'd better have a quick look in case it was important. She'd meant to open it earlier, but had forgotten all about it. Walking up the stairs to the first floor to the study, Rhoda slipped her thumb under the sealed edge and opened the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper folded in 3. Rhoda read the typed message. She stopped dead in her tracks at the top of the staircase. She had to read it again to make sure she wasn't mistaken. Don't go poking your nose in where it's not wanted. Leave the secrets of Telton Hall Chapel buried. You will regret it if you don't. What the hell? Rhoda said out loud. She turned over the envelope and looked at the postmark, but it was too smudged to read. Surely this had to be some sort of joke. Had she really just received a poison pen letter? It was unbelievable. Nate appeared on the landing from the study. Everything okay? This is the end of CD 4. The book continues on CD 5. CD 5. Chapter 18. Alice, 1945. Alice sat on the edge of her bed in her room at Telton Hall, a letter in her hand that Mrs. Hartwell had just given her. She recognised Jess's handwriting. They had exchanged several letters since she'd been in Somerset, and she looked forward to hearing from her friend.
Alice hadn't heard from her father at all, though, and was surprised at how disappointed she was. Since Mrs. Hartwell had mentioned the couple who wanted to adopt the baby, Alice had half hoped her father would contact her and tell her to keep the baby and come home. But she knew that wouldn't really happen. She tore open the envelope and pulled out 2 sheets of writing paper. Dear Alice, how are you? God, I miss you. Do you think I can come and visit? I could save the train fare, and maybe your Mrs. Hartwell will let me stay for one night. Would you like that? Do you think it would be possible? Have you been keeping well? I hope they're not making you do too much. I'm glad you have a friend there, but don't forget, I'm your best friend. Alice smiled. She could imagine Jess saying that in a semi-serious tone. She missed Jess, too. She went back to the letter. Look, I have some news for you, but it's not good. I didn't know whether I should tell you or not, but I thought it was best you knew and best that it came from me. Please sit down if you're not already. Howard came to see me at Rice's the other day. He caught me as I was coming out of the shop on my lunch break. I thought it was strange to see him there, and I could tell from the look on his face it wasn't a social visit. There was an officer waiting in a car parked over the road. It was about Brett. I'm so sorry, Alice. There's no other way to say this. But Brett was on a bombing mission, and his plane was hit by enemy fire. It went down in the sea. There were no survivors. Brett's dead. Alice's breath caught in her throat. Her hands began to shake as she absorbed the news. She read the letter again, and her eyes filled with tears. Brett was dead. Despite his standing her up at the altar and her being here at Telton Hall, somewhere in her heart she'd had this tiny flicker of hope that he would turn up one day and declare his love for her, that he'd made a mistake and wanted to marry her. Then he would whisk her away with him. She would have the baby, and they would live happily ever after. There was no happy ending now. Alice flopped onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow and crumpling the letter in her hand. The knowledge that Brett was dead was more painful than she had ever imagined it could be. Alice had no concept of time, but she was aware of Lily coming into the room and gasping. Oh my God, Alice, whatever's the matter? She rushed over and put her arm over Alice's back. Alice, please, what's happened? Alice sniffed and moved herself to a sitting position. She wiped away the tears from her face. I've just had a letter from home. The father of the baby has been killed in action. The words sounded hollow and distant, unreal even. How could it be true? What? Oh, Alice, I'm so sorry. Lily put both arms around Alice and pulled her in for a hug. After a while, she sat up and, with her hands on Alice's shoulders, looked at her. Now, I know it's very sad, it really is. The death of a young man is tragic, but don't be crying over him anymore. Remember, he abandoned you. He didn't shed any tears for you. Alice prickled at the harsh words. Lily may have been right, but they stung all the same. I know. He may not have loved me, or loved me enough, but I did love him. I really did. Alice flattened out the letter on her knees and read the rest of it. I know this will be a shock to you, Alice, and I am sorry to be the one to tell you. I wish I was there to tell you in person. You must look after yourself now, you and the baby. It's probably for the best the baby is being adopted, and I hope the meeting with the new parents goes well. Let me know, won't you? Take care, my dear friend, and I hope to see you soon. Love, Jess. Kiss. She passed the letter to Lily to read. She sounds like a good friend, replied Lily. Although I see I have competition for being your best friend. She gave Alice a nudge with her shoulder. I suppose it's all right to have 2 best friends, one here and one there. Alice smiled, and taking the letter back, folded it up. I suppose so too. I'd better get back to work, said Lily. Mrs. Hartwell sent me up here to make sure you were all right. She thought you'd be down, but I'll explain why. She'll understand. Get some rest. You've had a nasty shock. I'll bring some tea up mid-morning. Alice didn't argue. She was overcome by a wave of tiredness, and all she wanted to do was sleep. As promised, Lily brought Alice up a cup of tea at 11 o'clock, together with a small slice of cake that Cook had somehow managed to make with no eggs. "Mrs. Hartwell said to have the rest of the day off," said Lily. "Cook said she can manage on her own. That's kind of them." Alice took a sip of her tea. "I think I need to get some fresh air. I'm over the shock, just feel really, really sad. You know, like a deep sadness." She looked up at the ceiling and gulped back fresh tears. "I'm fed up of feeling sad and losing everything. Hey, come on now. No more crying. It won't do you or the baby any good." Alice broke the little sponge cake in two and offered one half to Lily. "You have some." "No, you're eating for two. You eat it all." She backed away. "I've got to get back to work. I'll see you later." "Thanks, Lily. You really are my best friend here." "I should think so." Lily winked before opening the door and disappearing down the hallway. Alice finished her tea and cake and forced herself to take her own advice and get some fresh air. She went through the kitchen, which fortunately was empty. She could see Cook at the end of the garden talking to one of the POWs. Alice nipped out of the door and hurried along the side of the house, through an archway cut in the hedge, and out onto the back lawn of Telton Hall. Somehow, Mrs. Hartwell had managed to persuade whoever it was to allow her to keep her lawn and not have it dug up for planting vegetables. The flower beds were full, and very soon the opening blooms would be a riot of colour. The other side of the lawn mirrored this side, surrounded by a hedge with an archway through into another part of the grounds. Beyond that was more of a wooded area, where there was a bench tucked away under a willow tree. Alice sat down on the bench and, with her eyes closed, breathed in the fresh air. There was only a gentle wind, but enough to allow the smell of the farm to drift her way. "One of the drawbacks of having pigs and chickens," thought Alice. The sound of someone whistling had Alice opening her eyes. She didn't recognise the tune, and it was getting closer. Then, through the gap in the hedge, came Paolo, the Italian prisoner, with his wheelbarrow full of horse manure. Alice sat stock still. He hadn't noticed her under the shade of the drooping willow branches. Should she say something? Cough? Sit still and hope he walked past? He stopped a few feet away from her, alongside the rose bushes. He must have felt her eyes on him, for he turned around, and when he saw her there, he jumped in alarm, stumbling backwards into his wheelbarrow, right on top of the manure. Alice leaped to her feet, but couldn't stifle the small giggle that erupted from her throat. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," she said, controlling her laughter. "Are you all right?" She didn't know whether he understood her or not. She took a few steps towards him, emerging from the willow branches, and held out her hand. "Here, let me help you." Paolo raised his eyebrows at her, but took her hand and hauled himself, with the help of Alice, from the wheelbarrow. He brushed himself down. "I smell like poo now." Alice tried to suppress her smile. "I am sorry." "Do not worry." He looked at her, his face filling with concern. "You have been crying?" Alice looked down at her feet. "I'm all right." "Why are you sad all the time? Do you not want to be here?" Alice wondered whether he'd seen young women like her come to Telton Hall before. "I had some bad news today," she found herself explaining. "Oh, I am sorry. Please, you should sit." He motioned towards the bench, and Alice sat back down. "Bad news is more bad when far away from home." He spoke with the sentiment that only someone who had experienced it themselves could. "Someone I used to know, a man, has died," explained Alice. "I am sorry. That is the worst news to receive. Was he someone special to you?" Alice fiddled with her sleeve cuff. "He was once, but hadn't been for a while. He was..." She stopped herself from speaking. "The father of your baby?" Paolo finished the sentence for her. Alice nodded. "So I suppose you know why I'm here." "I guessed. My sister has a child, also my cousins. When they were pregnant, they looked the same as you." I didn't think I was showing yet. Not properly. Alice slid her hand across her stomach.
No, but you have a look on your face. I cannot explain, but you look like they did.
Alice gazed up at the sky and the plump white clouds drifting by. A bird darted across the hedge, landing briefly in a silver birch. It was a magpie. Another followed it, and then they both took off. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy. Paolo looked confused.
What?
Magpie superstition, said Alice. So, your sister, she has a child?
Yes, she has a son. His name is Luca, but I have not met him yet.
I hope it's not too long before you can see them again. Her husband must be very proud of his family. Paolo dropped his gaze and shook his head.
Husband killed in the war.
Ah, now Alice understood. She felt a wave of compassion for the Italian and for his sister, even though she didn't know her. I'm sorry, she said. That's very sad. Paolo clenched his jaw and took an audible breath.
Too many lives have been lost in this war. Too much hardship, too much pain and sorrow.
And even when the war is over, the legacy will continue for a long time. She held Paolo's gaze, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. They may have been on opposing sides, according to their leaders, but there was no animosity between them.
When the war is over, we must try to make the world a better place to live, he said solemnly. It is our duty as people.
Alice nodded. A shout from somewhere on the other side of the hedge, calling Alice's name, broke the spell. Alice took a hurried step away from Paolo. That's Mrs. Hartwell. I'd better go. She nipped through the gap in the hedge, unsure what had just happened with her and Paolo, but certain that she no longer viewed him as a prisoner. He was another casualty of the war, just like her. Ah, there you are, Alice, called Mrs. Hartwell from the terrace. And then, as Alice sneered, I see you found the rose garden. Alice wrapped her cardigan around her body. Sorry, I was just having a few minutes to myself. Of course. Mrs. Hartwell looked towards the garden. Alice followed her gaze, and the figure of Paolo tending to the roses could just be made out. Lily told me your sad news. Come in and have some lunch. Alice was grateful Mrs. Hartwell didn't mention Paolo. She wasn't quite sure what she would think of Alice talking to a prisoner. As they walked back towards the open French doors, Alice's relief dropped as Billy stood in the doorway, adopting his usual pose of cigarette in hand.
Alice,
he said in acknowledgement.
Sorry for your loss.
Alice swallowed. She hated the thought that Billy knew about Brett. It was personal. Thank you, she forced herself to say.
If you need anyone to talk to...
He left the rest of the sentence hanging in the air. Thank you, she said again, as she followed his stepmother through the French doors. Billy stood back to let them through, but put his hand out, resting it on Alice's arm.
Don't be taken in by the prisoners, he said in a low voice.
Mrs. Hartwell was occupied with Jack, telling him to wash his hands before lunch. Billy moved his head closer to Alice's.
You can't trust them. We've had problems before when our guests have become too trusting of them. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you.
Thanks for the warning, said Alice, relieved that Billy removed his hand. I'll bear that in mind.
5th of May, 1945. Carissime Mamma e Sofia, I have heard on the radio that Berlin has fallen and Hitler is dead. This surely must be the end of the war. I am, of course, praying that it is. It cannot go on for much longer, now the Allies have control of Europe. I hope the soldiers will be honorable and respectful to the civilians. Please write to me as soon as you can, so I know you are safe. I received your letters this week, and I could hear the sadness in your words, Sophia. I can only imagine how much you are grieving for Franco. I am so very sorry. It was good to hear how well Luca is doing. I bet now he is crawling, you have to watch him all the time. Do you remember the story Mama always tells of me when I was crawling? One day she left me on the rug in the living room and went to the kitchen to make some lunch. When she came back, I was nowhere to be seen. She thought I had been stolen. Eventually, she found me under the sofa. And, Mama, I hope you are recovered from your cold and cough. It is indeed an unusual time of year to become ill, but we are in unusual times, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Keep taking the warm honey. That will help your throat. I remember how you used to make us drink it when we were ill. I also remember the boiled cabbage leaves you used to make us drink. I have to confess, it was the most disgusting thing I have ever had to consume in my entire life. It really can't be much longer before the war ends, and I am able to return home. It is my dearest wish to see you both again, and to meet Luca for the first time. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 19. Nate, 2022. Nate stared at the letter Rhoda had just shown him.
What the fuck? He muttered. Is this for real?
It appears so, said Rhoda. It was sent to the museum. I picked it up this morning before I drove down here. Didn't have time to open it earlier.
It seems so ridiculous. Have you got the envelope?
Rhoda handed it over. The postmark is smudged, but it would only be the area from where it was posted. My guess is it came from around here, though. I mean, who in West Sussex would know anything about the remains? It didn't make the national news.
It does seem weird. What's your gut feeling?
That if this is real, like a genuine threat, then it proves we're onto something. That there's someone who doesn't want us, or rather me, to discover the identity of the remains. She gave Nate a purposeful look. It also means that I'm more determined than ever to find out who he was. Nate glanced down the stairs, where he could see the door to the living room was open.
Come into the study. I don't want Dad to overhear.
He closed the door behind them.
Look, if this is for real, if we're treating this as a serious threat, we should tell the police. They're likely to take over the investigation then.
I doubt it. This letter isn't a direct threat. It's more like a warning. What can the police do? They can't do anything until whoever it is has broken the law.
Isn't threatening behaviour an offence?
Rhoda read the letter out loud. Don't go poking your nose in where it's not wanted. Leave the secrets of Telton Hall Chapel buried. You will regret it if you don't. It's not really a threat. They haven't threatened to do anything. Nate blew out a breath. She was right, of course.
I don't like it. Let's just assume for a minute that it's an empty threat. We can carry on looking into it and no harm done. If it's a serious threat, then we can wait to see if the sender ups their game.
Yes, I don't think they're going to leap from sending a letter to cutting my brake cables without anything in between. She grinned and shrugged.
I guess you're right.
He looked around the study.
So, let's see if we can find this Bible or ledger for the work carried out at the chapel, preferably both. The Bible might throw up a name that we haven't considered, or someone Dad has forgotten about, especially as Dad would only have been about 10 at the time.
He walked over to the bookshelves on the left-hand side of the desk.
They're more likely to be over here. This is where Dad keeps all the paperwork to do with Telton Hall. My grandmother was very organised, but I can't say Dad has inherited that trait.
Nate began scanning the shelves, occasionally pulling out a book to check its contents. There were 3 rows of box files, and on the bottom shelf were 2 document storage boxes. Is the Bible likely to be over here? Asked Rhoda, looking at the other bookshelf. What does it look like? Is it big, small, colour?
In my mind, it's maybe A4 size, a mottled green sort of colour with gold lettering. I haven't seen it for years. I just remember it from when I was a kid.
I'll have a look over here.
Yeah, they look older books. My grandmother was a bit of a bookworm and in later life used to collect special and limited editions. They're all along where you are.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, said Rhoda, after 10 minutes of searching through all the books. Any luck with the ledgers?
Nope.
Nate pushed the first of the storage boxes back on the shelf. It had contained manila folders dated throughout the mid-1930s to early 1940s, containing all the expenses, in and out, that went through Telton Hall. He pulled the second box out.
Hopefully this one will cover the dates we're looking for.
Ah, looks like I found the Bible, said Rhoda. Nate looked up as she pulled out a book from the shelf. It looked smaller than he remembered.
Is that it?
Rhoda opened the cover and flicked through the pages. This can't be the right one. She came over and handed it to him. There's nothing written inside.
No, that's not it.
He looked back at the shelf.
What's next to it?
Nothing. It was on the end of a row. Rhoda kneeled down beside him. Hopefully we'll have more luck with the box. Nate removed the lid. Another stack of manila folders occupied the space, and he began flicking through.
September 1940, October, November.
He took them out, placing them in order on the floor.
See what I mean about my grandmother? A folder for every month.
He removed the next batch of folders. 1944, said Rhoda, taking them from him and flicking through them. Yep, January through to December.
This batch must be 1945.
Nate lifted some more folders out.
January, February, March, April, July, August, September, October, November, December.
He paused and took out the remaining folders.
That's odd. May and June 1945 are missing.
What about in this box? Rhoda pulled the final box from the shelf. A hurried search by Nate proved fruitless.
Nope. These are 1947, 1948, 49, 50, and 51.
Are there any other boxes?
I don't know. I'll have to ask Dad. My grandmother was still alive in the 50s, so I assume she was still dealing with the paperwork. It makes sense that there are, but where?
When did your dad take over the farm?
Oh, couldn't tell you. I think it just happened over the years. He left school at 14 and would have helped on the farm then. I assume my grandmother's stepson Billy was working on the farm at some point. Then he cleared off and Dad was left to run the farm on his own.
There was a silence as each of them went over the detail. So, the missing files are for May and June 1945, said Rhoda. That was when the war ended. Do you think in all the excitement they didn't keep the records up to date? Have a check through the folders for July, in case they've all been merged into one. A thorough search of the July and August folders revealed nothing.
They must have been misfiled somewhere, said Nate.
His eyes grazed the bookshelf and settled on one book in particular. Aha, he said, as he pulled out the book. What have you found? Nate opened the book and scanned the contents.
This is my grandmother's diary of all the girls who came to stay at Telton Hall.
Oh, wow. Does it cover 1945? Rhoda was crouching next to him now, and the faint smell of her perfume teased his senses. Nate focused on the book.
Here we go. Yep, 1945. And here is Alice Renshaw.
He looked across the page where Alice's expected due date was, but the following columns, where his grandmother had listed dates of birth of the babies, the gender and the names of the people who had adopted the baby, were all blank. Alice's name was the last entry in the book.
What do you make of all that? Asked Nate.
I've no idea. Do you think she left before she had the baby?
I suppose so. Or something might have happened to her.
What, like she died?
It's possible.
Maybe your aunt can shed some light on it, suggested Rhoda. I know she would only have been about 12 herself, but she might know why your grandmother stopped taking in any girls.
It might be because the war ended, said Nate. Perhaps there wasn't the need for it, or maybe she just wanted to stop doing it.
He looked at his watch.
Oh, I've got to get Isaac soon, but I'll have a good look through this evening.
He replaced the record book back on the shelf and lifted the ledger box onto the table in the centre of the room, next to the photographs, while Rhoda returned the Bible to its place on the shelf. Nate watched her pause as she pushed the book into place. Her finger tapped the edge of the shelf. Look at this, she said.
What's that?
Nate went over and looked at the shelf. Can't you see?
Nope.
Rhoda ran her finger along the edge of the shelf, lifting it and holding it up in front of Nate's face. "Look."
"Yeah, the place is bloody dusty," said Nate. "I don't think it's high on Dad's list of priorities. Please don't write 'clean me' in the dust. He'll never see it, and it'll be there forever. Well, until this place is ripped apart by the builders."
"Never mind all that," said Rhoda. "You're missing the point. Look here, at the space next to the Bible. It's not dusty. There's a clear line where the dust came up to. There was another book here. You can see where the dust has been disrupted when the book was taken out." Nate looked closer. Rhoda was absolutely right.
"Okay, so a book was here but isn't anymore. Probably taken out recently, as there's no new dust where the book had stood."
He looked back at the other books on the shelf. 2 Bibles, a prayer book, and several hymn books.
"This looks like the religious section of the collection."
"And it looks like it could have been a reasonable-sized book," said Rhoda. "Judging by the space, quite a thick book. Not dissimilar to how you'd imagine the size of an old Bible." She looked expectantly at him.
"I don't know what to say," he confessed. "Who's moved the Bible, assuming that's what it is?"
"Maybe you could ask your father."
"Yeah, not right now, though. I haven't really got the time. I'll talk to him this evening after dinner."
"I should head off too," said Rhoda. "Let me know what your dad says, won't you?"
"Yeah, of course. I'd better just put those other boxes back."
Rhoda paused at the table where the photographs and boxes were. "I meant to have another look at these photos."
"Did you want to stay for dinner?"
Nate found himself asking.
"Although I appreciate you've had to share a meal with me once already today."
Rhoda gave a laugh. "I would say yes, but I really need to get back and catch up on some work I'm a bit behind on."
"When are you next back here?"
Nate tried to sound casual. He'd enjoyed Rhoda's company and had to admit he was a bit disappointed she was heading off. "Tomorrow. Now the scaffolding is up, there's nothing to stop me."
"Well, come and have a look at the pictures then. I might have some news on the missing paperwork and Bible."
"That will be good. It does seem odd that both things we are looking for are missing."
"Yeah, it does seem strange none of it is here, but it doesn't mean Dad had anything to do with it,"
replied Nate, although he couldn't really come up with a plausible alternative. The telephone in the study rang out. "Bloody hell, I didn't know those things still existed." Rhoda eyed the vintage-looking telephone on the desk. "I thought it was for show." Nate grinned and picked up the receiver, but stopped. He could hear his dad answer the phone downstairs.
"Hello, Telton Hall?"
"Jack, is that you?" It was Aggie.
"Who do you think it is?"
came his father's reply. Nate replaced the receiver gently so as not to disturb the phone call.
"Dad beat me to it."
"Does your dad not have a mobile?" asked Rhoda, as they made their way out of the room.
"Yes, but he doesn't use it. Only switches it on if he's out in the field and needs to use it, which, incidentally, is never."
As they made their way down the staircase, Nate was aware of his father's raised voice.
"No, now is not a good time. Don't be so stupid, Aggie. You know how I feel."
There was no pretending neither Nate nor Rhoda couldn't hear his dad's side of the conversation. Rhoda pulled an eek face. "I'll just slip out," she said softly.
"I can't talk now," Jack was saying. "Yes, she is, as a matter of fact."
They were at the foot of the stairs, and Nate felt obliged to cough loudly, which elicited a smothered giggle from Rhoda. "Sorry," she whispered. Nate saw her to the door.
"Don't apologise. God knows what's going on in there. That was Aggie on the phone. They're probably standing at their respective windows looking along the driveway at each other. Funny old buggers they are at times."
Nate waved Rhoda off and went back indoors. All was quiet. He popped his head around the living room door.
"You okay, Dad?"
"Yes, fine."
"Sounded like you and Aggie were having a bit of a set-to. I picked up the phone just after you did and heard her say hello,"
Nate added, by way of explanation. His father's eyes narrowed.
"Nothing for you to worry about. Now, where's that young lady from the museum, Rhoda? What were you doing upstairs with her?"
Nate let out a laugh.
"It's all right, Dad. We were just in the study. We were trying to see if we could find the Bible. What do you want that for? I thought all that business was going to be forgotten about. Do you know where it is? Nate asked again, choosing not to answer the question. It looks like it's been there, but recently moved. Also, we were looking for the ledgers for the work carried out here, and oddly, the files for May and June 1945 are missing. You don't know anything about them, do you? No, I don't. Can you just leave it all alone? I don't know what the fascination is. We're just curious, that's all. Rhoda wants to do what she thinks is the right thing. It's not hurting anyone. If anything, it's helping someone know what happened to their loved one. Or hated one, said his father. Well, I think you should leave the past in the past. Things happened during the war that might not have happened any other time. You won't be doing anyone any favours digging up a load of trouble after all this time. Currently, we're doing no harm, said Nate. Are you sure that's the only reason you're helping her? Nate did an exaggerated eye roll. I've got to get Isaac. See you in a while. Isaac chatted happily in the car about his chess game, and Nate listened attentively. Isaac loved going. It suited his analytical mind, where there was order and set rules with no deviation. Nate tried as much as he could to provide that same level of stability in his son's home life, and despite their differences, he and Siobhan were still united in their ambition for Isaac to make the most of life and the opportunities which came his way. How was school? Nate asked, as Isaac finished a move-by-move account of the chess match that afternoon. It was okay. I showed Mr. Barndon my Victorian project. He thought it was good. He liked the pictures of the school. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm glad he approved. He said it was good I actually got to go there and not just look on the internet, said Isaac, gazing out of the window. I think so too. We should go there again another day. Singlewood Open Air Museum, Singlewood Hill, Dean Woods, West Sussex, P0197AA. Nate smiled at his son and reached out to ruffle his hair, as Isaac then recited the grid reference from the Ordnance Survey map. I won't need the sat-nav next time, said Nate. By now, they had reached Telton Hall, and as Nate slowed the car to turn into the driveway, he looked over towards Telton Cottage. There's Aunt Aggie at the window, he said, exchanging a wave with her. As he drove up towards the house, he remembered the disagreement he'd inadvertently overheard between his father and aunt. Something about it was bothering him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He pulled up into his usual parking spot, and he and Isaac hopped out of the car. Nosey Parker, said Isaac. Noseyyparker. Noun, a person who is nosy. Nate laughed. Who's a nosy Parker? He asked, as he followed Isaac in through the front door. Aunt Aggie said Rhoda was. When did she say that? On Sunday, on the telephone to Grandad. Nate eyed his son. Were you listening in on their telephone conversation on another phone? You know you're not to do that. I wanted to say hello. And did you? No, they sounded cross, so I put the phone back down. Right, said Nate. Well, good lad for putting it down, but you really mustn't pick it up. Okay. Isaac broke into a run and raced down the hallway to the kitchen, where he was greeted by his grandfather. Jack always had a glass of milk and a chocolate biscuit waiting for Isaac's return from chess club. Nate made his way down the hall, perturbed that his aunt had already formed an undeserved opinion of Rhoda. Chapter 20. Rhoda, 2022. Rhoda went directly home, stopping only to grab a takeaway pizza. It would have been nice to stay to dinner with the Hartwells again, something which surprised her, as she wasn't given to striking up close friendships so easily. She paused mid-thought. She'd used the term friendship. Really, they were more like acquaintances, or they should be, given the little time she'd known them. But strangely, she felt at ease with Nate and Jack.
Anyway, dinner had been declined mostly because she was eager to try to find out what she could about Alice Renshaw. It was just a hunch, but Rhoda felt sure the remains at the chapel were connected with something that had happened around the end of the war. The ledgers were missing for that period of time, which she felt was significant. If the floor in the chapel was repaired at around that time, they might also show who carried out the repairs, which could also be significant. It was troubling that the meticulously filed documents were missing. It couldn't be a coincidence. By the time she reached home, Rhoda had made up her mind to focus on those 2 months. As soon as she was in her flat, Rhoda changed out of her jeans and t-shirt and into her pyjamas. Sitting cross-legged on the sofa, the pizza box next to her and the laptop on her knees, she grabbed her bag to find her notebook. She saw the poison pen letter tucked inside and read it again. She still didn't really know what to make of it. Rather than dwelling on it, she set about scrolling the internet and genealogy sites for any information she could get about Alice Renshaw. Half an hour later, she looked at the rather meagre offerings. Alice Renshaw, date of birth 3rd of March 1927. Father, Thomas Renshaw. Occupation, gardener. Mother, Emily Louise Renshaw. Occupation, housewife. Rhoda had been able to track back and find the grandparents' names, but they weren't of any use to her. She needed to find more about Alice going forwards, but without dates, there was no way of knowing where to search for a marriage or death certificate. If Alice was at Telton Hall around the end of the war, she would have been 18, so assuming she was there because she was pregnant, there was a child somewhere who would be 77 now. It was likely they had been adopted, so whether finding them would throw any light on the mystery, Rhoda wasn't sure. If Alice was still alive, she'd be 95. Rhoda was at a dead end unless she knew if Alice had married and what her married name was. Rhoda scrolled through her phone to the picture she'd taken of the group photo. Would any of them still be alive? If they were around Alice's age, then again it was a possibility, even if a remote one. What a shame Joyce Colburn couldn't remember any more details. There was, of course, Nate's Aunt Aggie. Rhoda wondered whether she'd be able to talk to her tomorrow about it. Rhoda flipped the lid of her pizza box closed. It was so frustrating. How on earth was she going to find anything out if everyone was dead? No wonder the police weren't interested in pursuing it. For no particular reason, other than that she needed something to do, rather than dwell on what she couldn't do, Rhoda looked up Louise Hartwell, Nate's grandmother. An internet search of the name came back with numerous Louise Hartwells, all very much alive. Rhoda typed in Louise Hartwell, Telton Hall. This search yielded more information than she'd anticipated. The first result was a small section on an obscure blog by a local history group about adoptions during the Second World War. There was one account from someone whose mother had worked as a community midwife and had visited Telton Hall. During the war, my mother, Anne Roberts, worked as a community midwife in and around the Telton area. I would often go along on her visits rather than be left on my own. I always remember going to Telton Hall, where there were young unmarried women who were pregnant but unable to keep their children. It was sad, as some of the women were upset because they didn't want to give up their babies. One particular time that sticks in my mind was when my mother came out wiping tears from her face. I'd heard the pregnant woman crying in the room, and my mother and Mrs. Hartwell comforting her. No one wanted to give up their baby, but you didn't have a choice in those days. This particular day, a young couple were waiting outside in the hallway. They looked very anxious and asked my mother if everything was all right. I remember the man saying he was a doctor and asking if they needed his help. My mother just asked him if he was a heart surgeon, because the young woman in the room had a broken heart. Rhoda jotted down the name of the woman giving the account, a Sylvia Roberts. She wasn't sure if it was an important piece of information or not. It would be easier to trace the men in the photograph, as they hadn't changed their names when they got married. From another quick search of the internet, Rhoda learned that tracking down the names of the POWs in England wasn't that easy. Most of the records had been destroyed after the war, and she was more likely to get some, if any, information from the International Red Cross, British POW camps' local archives, and/or local history groups. She sighed as she acknowledged the lengthy process this would entail, potentially for no reward. The only complete name she had of the POWs was that of Paolo Sartori, who had made the stained glass window. She'd see if she could track him down on the International Ancestry site. She typed his name into her internet browser, which only served to inform her it was not an uncommon name, with most of them being on Facebook, and therefore unlikely to be her Paolo Sartori, even if he was still alive. She doubted a man in his 90s would bother with Facebook. She found the Telton Parish website, where there was a small section on the stained glass window at the chapel. It didn't provide her with any new information, other than to say Paolo Sartori was 21 when he was brought to England, having spent time en route from the Middle East in South Africa, where he was treated for a broken leg. If he was still alive, he'd be 98. The last paragraph added a further piece of information, stating that Paolo Sartori had come from a small village in Tuscany near Pisa, where his mother and sister lived. Rhoda made a note of this information, her mind already racing ahead that she may be able to contact the family. His mother, of course, wouldn't still be alive, but perhaps his sister would, or more likely, some relatives, children even. Rhoda considered it all. The only way to be sure if it was Paolo Sartori would be through DNA, which would mean tracking down his family in Italy. That was, of course, beyond her limits. She knew from past experience with trying to trace her brother not to get blinkered and fixated on one theory. She needed to keep looking at other possibilities. She turned her attention to Billy, Jack Hartwell's stepbrother. She'd see if she could tactfully ask Jack what Billy's surname was. He would be dead by now, but if she could trace any family he had, they might be able to tell her something. Maybe Billy had spoken to them about his time at Telton Hall. It was all extremely frustrating, and Rhoda went to bed quite dejected. She tried to put all thoughts of Telton Hall from her mind. She needed to clear her head so she could think straight. Her brain was full of information that she couldn't quite put in order or join up with any other information she had. It all felt very disjointed. When Rhoda awoke the next morning, she felt slightly more optimistic. The weather wasn't as nice as it had been the previous week. As she picked her way over the pebbles to the sea, she hoped the invigorating cold water would perk her up a bit. There was no sign of Shani yet, and Rhoda swam up and down, parallel with the coastline, in a bid to warm herself up. The waves were choppy that morning, and kept trying to push her onto shore. A couple of times she caught a mouthful of salt water, which she spat out. She didn't speak to Shani that morning, but they did exchange a wave as Rhoda was padding back to her flat and spotted Shani at the end of the road, heading for the beach. Rhoda liked the comfortable nature of their relationship, neither feeling they had to speak to each other or wait for each other on their morning swim, and both knew no offence would be given or taken. Rhoda liked this unpressurized rhythm of their friendship. It was uncomplicated and honest. She didn't think she'd ever had that type of relationship with anybody. It was easier to keep people at a distance, as there was less chance of getting hurt that way. "Have fun in Somerset," called Shani, as she steered her bike onto Beach Drive. "Thank you," called back Rhoda. Within half an hour, after showering and getting her work bag together, Rhoda was in her car and driving down to the West Country. With each mile she clocked up, the clouds increased, and by the time she'd hit Somerset, they had turned from white to grey, and the wind had picked up considerably. Great. Perfect weather for taking out a stained glass window and making sure the chapel was left weatherproof. By the time she'd reached Telton, splodges of bulbous raindrops were splattering the windscreen. She slowed as she came to Telton Cottage, preparing to take the turn into Telton Hall. A movement in her peripheral vision made her look again at the cottage, and she saw someone hurrying out of the front door, pulling the hood of their jacket up over their head. At first, she thought it was Nate and went to wave, but the figure got into a BMW X5. Rhoda noted the little tug of disappointment that it wasn't Nate, but forced herself not to overanalyze her reaction. Under a dark, grey sky and falling rain, Telton Hall looked particularly oppressive that morning. The windows looked like soulless black eyes, all fixated on the approach to the house, boring into her. Rhoda parked in what was becoming her usual spot, on the left near the gate that led up to the chapel. Now that looked even more oppressive. Standing alone on the hill, the clouds appeared darker and threatening. Rhoda had to admit, the thought of trudging up the hill was unappealing in itself. But then to be working in the chapel alone on such a miserable day, next to the site where the skeleton was found, didn't exactly put a spring in her step. As she was unloading the equipment she needed to lug up to the chapel, Jack came out of the house.
"Morning,"
he said, tipping the peak of his flat cap. They exchanged niceties, inquiring after each other.
"Had a phone call from the local paper. They want to do a piece on the chapel being taken down and moved. Are you all right with that?"
"Yes, of course. More than happy."
"Good. I hope you don't mind, but I gave them your number," said Jack.
"No problem at all."
"Do you need a hand with taking anything up to the chapel?"
"No, I'll be fine, thanks," said Rhoda. "I've got everything I need." She was sure Jack was only asking out of good manners. There was no way she'd expect him to carry anything up, and equally, there was no way she was going to get on the back of a quad bike with him. She'd already made her mind up about that, but fortunately he didn't offer. "Shall I take the key?" she asked.
"Oh, yes," said Jack. "Here it is. It's the only one we've got, so mind you don't lose it."
Rhoda took the long skeleton key from him. "I'll keep it safe, don't worry."
"Now, don't forget you can come down to the house to use the bathroom and make yourself a cup of tea. Come in through the kitchen garden and the kitchen. Save walking all the way around."
"Thanks, Jack. Much appreciated."
"I know the museum are bringing one of those Portaloo things down, but that's for the workmen. Don't want you having to share that with them."
"You don't know how glad I am you said that." Rhoda managed to lug her equipment up in one trip and was just in time to miss the first cloudburst of rain. It hammered onto the church roof and streamed down the windows. The surveyor had assured the museum that the footings were safe and the chapel wasn't going anywhere soon, despite having moved at some point. Rhoda hoped his prediction was correct. With her radio playing softly in the background, Rhoda set about tackling one of the smaller side windows. It would give her a chance to see how easy, or difficult, as the case might be, it would be to remove the stained glass. From what her previous inspections had shown, the newer window, Paolo's window, as she had started calling it, had been installed in the traditional method of straight into the stone, rather than being set in a wooden frame. Her first job was to set up her tables, where she'd be laying each panel of the stained glass window on a full-sized sheet of carbon paper. She'd then be able to make a rubbing of each panel to show the imprint of all the lead and copper-edged pieces to use as a reference point when the window was reassembled. Once that was organised, Rhoda climbed up on the scaffolding tower to begin removing the ties which kept the glass attached to the rods. It was always higher than she'd anticipated at the top of any scaffolding tower, but the chapel certainly wasn't the biggest one she'd worked on, and she was comfortable enough not to let it bother her. Rhoda worked happily away on the task, losing herself in the job she had loved for so long. The first panel was always the hardest one, as you didn't know what to expect, which is why she had started with one of the smaller stained glass windows. It wasn't until her stomach started rumbling that she realised it must be getting on for lunchtime. She had already drunk the bottle of water and snacked on the fruit she had brought with her. She had removed the rods and ties holding the window in place, and with her tool had scraped away the old lead around the edge of the window pane. Now the tricky bit was tilting the glass to just the right angle so she could lift it out of the clips which held it in place. As it was a small window, she was able to do this herself, removing the panel and placing it on the cloth beside her. Getting it down from the scaffolding to the safety of ground level was her next task. With the window wrapped in cloth, Rhoda slipped it into a rucksack, which she put on before she made her descent. Once on terra firma, she removed the window from the rucksack and placed it on the workbench. The next step was to board up the opening of the window to make it weatherproof. Fortunately, the rain had stopped, but the clouds were gathering overhead, grey and dark blue like a bruised sky. It was only a matter of time before it started pouring down again, and with the wind picking up, it would be driving it straight into the chapel. From her earlier measurements, Rhoda had already prepared a piece of plywood that would fit exactly into the space the stained glass window had previously occupied. It fitted perfectly, and she hammered in the tacks to keep it in place. Now seemed a good time to make the journey down to Telton Hall to use the bathroom, have a cup of tea, and eat her sandwiches, which she had left in the cool box in the boot of her car. It was slippery on the track going down, and a couple of times Rhoda nearly lost her footing, but she made the descent in one piece. As she reached her car, an idea sprung to mind. She checked her watch, and before she had time to think it through, Rhoda found herself driving into the village. She pulled up outside Joyce Colburn's house and knocked at the door. Joyce opened the door as before with the chain on. "Oh, it's you," she said, when Rhoda introduced herself. "What do you want?" "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I wondered if you remembered the village midwife, or, more importantly, her daughter, Sylvia Roberts." "Sylvia Roberts? She was just a young girl when her mother was the midwife." "Is she still local, do you know? Did she marry?"
"Sylvia married the vicar, if you must know, Stephen Montgomery."
Joyce frowned and let out a sigh.
"Look, I shouldn't be telling you all this, really. People don't want to be bothered by the past and what went on here during the war."
"I'm only trying to find out who that man was at the chapel, just so I can tell his family."
"You seem a nice young girl," said Joyce. "Don't get mixed up in all that. As I said, no one wants to bring all that business up."
"What business?" Joyce went to close the door, and Rhoda instinctively put her hand in the way. Then, realizing how intimidating that appeared, she removed it.
"I can't tell you anything else," said Joyce. "Now, please leave me alone, and don't come back asking any more questions."
With that, she shut the door, and Rhoda heard the chain being slid back into place. Rhoda was sorry for upsetting the old lady, but Joyce had given her Sylvia's married name. All Rhoda had to do now was to find out where Sylvia was, and she planned on doing that as soon as she got back to Telton Hall and her iPad. As Jack had instructed, Rhoda made her way through the gate in the wall of the kitchen garden and followed the path which ran directly down the middle to the kitchen. She hesitated, not wishing to just bowl in as if she owned the place, so she knocked on the back door. After a moment, she knocked again, this time harder, but there was still no answer. Perhaps Jack had nodded off, or he was busy around the farm. Although there was no actual farming for Jack to do, now the property was in the last stages of being sold, Rhoda knew he liked to keep busy. She had a quick scan of the farm buildings, but couldn't see Jack anywhere. Returning to the kitchen door, Rhoda tried the handle, and the door opened without resistance. She called out his name. There was a stillness within the house that only came when a building was empty. Without going further than the kitchen, Rhoda was already certain that Jack was out. Nevertheless, she called his name again, just in case she was mistaken and he was asleep in the living room. The room was empty, as were the dining room and a second reception room she hadn't been in before. Standing at the foot of the stairs, Rhoda called up into the cavernous stairwell. She was convinced she was alone in the house. She wanted to use the bathroom and remembered Nate had told her to use the one upstairs. She nipped up to the first floor, hoping this would not be the point at which Jack returned home, and jumped to the conclusion she was snooping around again. It wasn't until she was back in the kitchen that her heart rate settled into a more normal pattern. She felt guilty, and she hadn't actually done anything this time. It was then she noticed a handwritten note propped up against the kettle. It was from Jack, saying he had nipped over to see his cousin Aggie, and Rhoda was to help herself to tea. Rhoda felt a wave of relief. Jack obviously felt he could trust her to be in the house on her own. She set about making a cup of tea, and while the kettle boiled, she went out to the car to fetch her sandwiches. As she turned to head back to the house, she glanced up at the windows on the first floor, and for a moment she thought she saw movement inside the house. It was so fleeting she couldn't be sure. Was it just a shadow from one of the trees being blown about in the wind? She watched the window for a moment, waiting for the shadow to fall across the glass again. But it didn't, even though the trees were swaying energetically behind her. She had come out through the front door and left it ajar, but it was now closed. Again, the rational part of her brain told her it was the wind, a perfectly logical explanation. But the irrational part of her brain told her it was a big oak door, and it would have needed a draft from somewhere within the house to make it close, and it would have slammed shut, surely. She didn't remember hearing it slam. Rhoda went around to the back of the house and into the kitchen. This time, her caution was tinted with a dash of fear. What if there was someone other than Jack in the house? He had, after all, left the back door unlocked. Anyone could have simply walked in. She paused in the kitchen, listening attentively for the slightest groan of a floorboard, the tread of a foot on the stairs, or the creak of a door. In fact, any telltale sign that she wasn't alone. She was just being silly, she told herself. There was no one in the house. She was letting her imagination get the better of her. When did she start being afraid of nothing? Despite the little talking to she'd given herself, Rhoda kept an ear out to any strange sound while she made her cup of tea and sat down at the table to eat her sandwiches. Just as she had begun to relax and convince herself that there was no one in the house, she heard the unmistakable sound of a thud directly above her. Rhoda froze. Chapter 21. Alice, 1945. For some reason, Alice hated being upstairs in Telton Hall on her own. There was something about the high-ceilinged rooms with their long Georgian windows, which should have an uplifting effect, but they made Alice think of all the young women, like her, who had been here, all with their growing bellies as new life formed inside them, all sent away from home to spend their confinement far from the prying eyes of their villages or towns, all with a sense of shame for what they had allowed to happen, for what they had willingly taken part in. They had all come here to have their babies in secret and to give up their flesh and blood for adoption. In Alice's mind, the rooms and the hallway echoed with their silent tears. The carpets absorbed their sorrow, and the curtains soaked up their despair. She was due to meet the couple who were going to adopt her baby. The baby, she corrected herself. "Don't look so glum," said Lily, coming into the room. Alice was relieved to see her. "I didn't realise I did," she said, sitting down at the dressing table. She picked up her hairbrush. "You don't want to put them off." Lily came and stood behind her, taking the hairbrush from Alice's hand. She began brushing Alice's hair for her. "Don't I?" Lily stopped mid-brush. No, you don't." She gave a sympathetic smile to Alice's reflection in the mirror. "You want them to feel good about adopting the baby. This couple can give the baby everything you can't. I don't mean to be harsh, Alice. Please don't get upset now. I'm just being honest. Alice plucked her handkerchief from out of her sleeve and dabbed at her eyes. I know, but I can't help it. They are loaded. He's a doctor in London. This is the best thing you can do for the baby. It's the ultimate sacrifice a woman can make. You are giving the baby the best chance it is going to get in life. Alice nodded. She knew Lily was right, pragmatic as ever. Alice knew it made sense, but the yearning to keep the baby was overpowering. It was a physical ache that Alice didn't know was possible. Have you ever regretted giving up your baby? Asked Alice softly. Lily brushed Alice's hair vigorously. No, I haven't. She didn't meet Alice's gaze for a moment, but then looked up at her friend. I've wished I could have kept her. A beautiful little girl with a shock of red curls. She had the longest lashes possible, tiny little fingers and tiny little fingernails. Her skin was so delicate and translucent. She was just perfect. I know they tell you not to name her, but in my mind, she was called Kathleen. Her dad was Irish. He worked on the travelling fair. He never even knew I was pregnant. Had moved on to the next town and the next girl by the time I realised. Lily sat down on the edge of the bed, her thumb flicking the bristles of the brush. I wish every day she was here, but I don't regret the decision I made. She's with good people, wealthy people. They can give her the life I never had, and one I could never have given her. Alice turned to face Lily and held her hands in her own. I'm so sorry. Lily had never opened up to Alice about her baby, not properly. This revelation felt as if their friendship had moved to the next level. Don't be. I'm not sorry. It was the best thing that could have happened to Kathleen. What future did she have with me? She would have been taken off me, as I haven't got anywhere to live, or a job, or any money. I loved her so much, I knew I had to give her up. I would have been a selfish mother if I'd kept her. Love isn't always about keeping someone. Sometimes it's about letting them go. Tears fell from Lily's eyes, landing on their hands. Oh, Lily, you're so brave, so very brave. Alice pulled her friend towards her and hugged her tightly. After a few moments, Lily pulled away and dried her face on the towel in the bedroom. Look at me, getting all upset. I promised myself I wouldn't do that. I don't want to torture myself for doing the right thing. She brushed her dress down and stood up straight. And I've made you cry. Mrs. Hartwell will have my guts for garters. Come on, we need to get you presentable. At that point, there was the sound of the doorbell ringing. Oh, that's them, said Alice, suddenly feeling panicked. This was real. She was going to meet the couple who wanted to adopt her baby. She didn't correct herself this time. The baby, for now, was hers. And if she was only going to have another 6 or 7 months with the baby, she was jolly well going to acknowledge it as hers. No one could take these precious months from her. They were hers and hers alone. Giving herself a final check over in the mirror, Alice deemed herself presentable. Her eyes were a little red from crying, but with a tiny touch of mascara that Lily had got from somewhere, Alice didn't ask questions. She knew Lily liked to barter, and Alice decided the least she knew, the better, and a dab of face powder, origin also unknown, disguised the fact she'd been upset. Alice made her way downstairs, with Lily trailing behind. Lily herself wanted to get a glimpse of the couple and made sure she was walking down the hallway just as Alice opened the door to the sitting room. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Eggers, were introduced to Alice. They were younger than Alice had imagined, and Mrs. Eggers had a warm and welcoming, if slightly nervous, smile. Mr. Eggers was equally welcoming, if more formal. So good of you to meet us, he said, as he shook Alice's hand. Yes, thank you, so much. Mrs. Eggers gave a discreet glance to Alice's stomach, and when she realised Alice had noticed, she blushed. Please, sit down here next to me. Alice perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa and took the cup of tea Mrs. Hartwell passed over to her. Alice has been a great help in the few weeks she's been here, said Mrs. Hartwell.
She's been helping in the kitchen and around the house, just light duties.
How have you been keeping? Asked Mr. Eggers. Do you feel well in yourself? Are you being seen by a midwife?
Freddie, one question at a time, said Mrs. Eggers, with a nervous laugh. Sorry, Alice. My husband sometimes forgets he's not in doctor mode. Alice returned the smile. I'm very well, thank you. I haven't seen a midwife yet. The midwife is calling by in about 3 weeks' time, put in Mrs. Hartwell. That was news to Alice, but she kept her expression neutral. Oh, that's good. And have you had much morning sickness? Asked Mrs. Eggers. Not really. Just felt a little queasy. Been sick only a couple of times. Oh, it might mean you're carrying a boy then, said Mrs. Eggers, glancing at her husband.
That's an old wives' tale, darling, replied Mr. Eggers, and he squeezed his wife's hand. It was at that moment Alice saw the love pass between the Eggers. A tiny moment, just a fleeting look, but she could tell they loved each other. It filled Alice with hope and confidence that this couple would love her baby too. I expect you want to know about us, said Mrs. Eggers. I know it's not usual to meet prospective parents beforehand, but we firmly believe, or at least like to believe, that it sets everyone at ease, and this ultimately will be beneficial for you and the baby. Peace and love start before the child is born, and we want it born wrapped in positivity. Alice wasn't quite sure if she knew what Mrs. Eggers meant, but she liked the sound of it. My wife is very holistic, explained Mr. Eggers, as if reading Alice's mind. I'm more pragmatic and scientific, but we celebrate our differences. We truly believe a rounded approach to bringing up children, where they are confident in their surroundings and have the love of their parents, will make for a happy, contented and confident child and adult. Alice nodded. Being loved is the most important thing. Yes, I agree. It was Mrs. Eggers. I can't have children of my own, and yet it is the only thing I have ever wanted. So to have this opportunity is a blessing, and we give you our word. We will love the baby as if it were our own, and we will always be open and honest with them, so they know about you. That's one of the reasons we wanted to meet you, said Mr. Eggers. We won't be keeping you a secret from them. Mrs. Hartwell had been right when she'd said the Eggers were open-minded and progressive. Alice looked from wife to husband and back again. Thank you. It will be a great comfort to know that. They spent another hour talking together in the living room, and by the time the Eggers left, Alice was certain they were the best choice and the best chance her child would have. They had talked of their plans to give the child a good education, to travel abroad, to give the child experiences that Alice could only ever dream of. She learned they lived in Bath, in a big Regency house with a large back garden. Mrs. Eggers' parents lived nearby and would play an active part in the child's life. This both saddened and comforted Alice, as she thought of her own mum and how different her pregnancy might be if she were still alive. Despite all the luxury on offer to the child, none of this meant anything if Alice wasn't sure of the love, and she was certain the Eggers would love the child. There, aren't you glad you met them now? Asked Mrs. Hartwell, as they waved the car off down the driveway. Has it put your mind at rest? A bit, admitted Alice. In truth, she still felt torn at the idea of giving her baby to someone else. If only her circumstances had been different. If only Brett Cunningham hadn't stood her up. But that wouldn't have stopped him being killed on a bombing mission, would it? He had to go where he was ordered. It wasn't like he had a choice in the matter. She'd be a widow, but at least she'd still have her baby. Once she gave the baby up, she'd have nothing. Are you all right, dear? Asked Mrs. Hartwell, ushering Alice back into the house. Yes, I think I'll just have a few minutes to myself, if that's all right with you. Mrs. Hartwell tipped her head to one side, considering her request. Yes, of course, but Alice, try not to think of how you feel. Try to focus on the future for the baby. Alice nodded,
unable to form an answer as she felt a ball of emotion churn over in her stomach and a vice-like grip on her heart. She walked straight through the house to the kitchen and out of the back door. Fortunately, there was no sign of Billy, and initially she was going to head towards the willow tree, but changed her mind, just in case Billy was camped out there, expecting her to seek solitude after the meeting with the Eggers. She'd outwit him, she decided, and changed direction, nipping through the gate and out into the farmyard. She wasn't sure what drew her to the chapel. She certainly wasn't religious, and normally the place gave her the creeps. But at the same time, she felt a pull. As she opened the oak door and stepped inside, she felt a calmness settle around her. Her footsteps echoed on the stone floor, and she slipped into a pew halfway up on the left, sliding along into the shadows of the walls. Alice thought she should pray, but she didn't know what to say. Her mother had taken her to church when she was younger, but once she became ill, those visits had stopped. Alice's father had turned his back on the church at roughly the same time, blaming God for his wife's illness. Alice had gone along with the narrative. It was easier than trying to understand why God would want to take her mother from her. Now, sitting in the pew, she somehow felt close to her mother. Alice clasped her hands together in her lap, and, with her head bowed, she closed her eyes. God, if you're there, please make the Eggers be a nice couple and look after and love my baby. Please let me be making the right choice. And, Mum, if you're there too, please know that I'm doing what I think is best for the baby. I wish you were here. You'd tell me what to do, I know you would. I miss you so much. Please forgive me for not being able to keep the baby. I love you. It was only then she realised she wasn't the only person in the chapel. Something made her look up, and in the front pew on the opposite side of the building, sitting in the far corner like she was, she could see the bowed head of a man. She gulped as she noted the red patch of cloth across the shoulder of the prisoner uniform. It was a patch to show he was a POW. It was hard to make out the colour of his hair in the dim light, so Alice wasn't sure if it was Paolo or Carlo. From the back, they both looked the same, with their dark hair cut short. He must know she'd come into the chapel. He couldn't have failed to hear her footsteps. Had he heard her talking to God and her mum? The prisoner rose and crossed himself, and as he turned to walk to the aisle, she saw it was Paolo. He looked over at her as he made his way down the centre of the chapel and nodded his head in acknowledgement. Alice nodded back at him. She wanted to say hello, but suddenly felt shy and nervous. He stopped at the end of the pew. "How are you?" He smiled, and immediately Alice felt at ease. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you," she said. "No, I should not be here. I am sorry." "Why shouldn't you be here?" Alice felt indignant on his part. "Who said you shouldn't?" "I do not think Billy will like it." "It's not up to him. Mrs. Hartwell would say it was all right." Even to Alice, she didn't sound convincing. They both knew that Billy would be an utter bastard about it. "Don't worry, I won't say anything. We're all allowed to pray, you know." "I like to come to look at the windows," explained Paolo. "My father was, I try to think of the word, glazier. Yes, I think that is the word. He made glass, coloured glass like this window. Since I was 12, my father taught me to do the same." Alice had never really thought about what the Italian prisoners did before the war. She supposed they were no different from the young men from Britain, who had been farmhands, mechanics, postmen and bank clerks one day, and then the next day they were soldiers, risking their lives and often giving their lives in the name of war. "I expect your father can't wait for you to come home." "My father, he died when I was 16. A look of sadness crossed Paolo's face, and Alice immediately recognised it as grief. "I'm sorry," she said. "My mum died when I was young, too. She used to be a dressmaker. I used to work in a department store selling clothes. It's not quite the same thing, but it makes me feel close to her."
"And did you make that dress?"
Paolo nodded towards the floral print dress, of which Alice had let out the seams just the day before, to allow for her increasing waist. "No, I bought this one from the department store. Staff discount."
"You are dressed up today?"
"I had to meet someone earlier. Well, 2 people. A couple," said Alice, then wondering how she was going to explain. Paolo nodded.
"I understand. I am sorry."
Unexpected tears filled Alice's eyes. She was so used to being told to keep a stiff upper lip that this little display of kindness from a stranger, an Italian POW no less, touched her more deeply than she expected. "Thank you," she whispered. Suddenly, the door to the chapel swung open, and Lily came racing in. "Oh, Alice, there you are. Come on, you need to get back to the house." "Why? What's the matter?" asked Alice. Lily hurried over to her, and from the pew behind urged her out. "Billy was asking where you were." She glanced at Paolo. "And where he was." Alice exchanged a worried look with Paolo. "You go," she said urgently. "Go quickly, before he finds you here."
"I am not scared of him."
"I know you're not, but don't make trouble for yourself," said Alice. "Now go, quickly. We won't say a word. If he asks, we haven't seen you."
"Thank you,"
said Paolo, and hurried out of the chapel. "Now we'd better get ourselves down to the farm sharpish," said Lily. "What's up with him, anyway? Why does he want to see me?" asked Alice. "No idea, but I thought I should warn you."
7th of May, 1945. Carissime Mamma e Sofia. Is it possible to have feelings for someone when you hardly know them? How do you know if your feelings are real, or if they are distorted by your circumstances and where you are in that moment in time? Can it be that the nationality of a person can be such a divide that they cannot be anything more than friends? It is 2:00 in the morning, and I cannot sleep. I have been thinking about this all night, and I do not know what the answer is. I thought I'd write it down here in my letter, in the hope that it would make things clearer, but I'm not sure that it has. I know, Sophia, you say I think too deeply about things, and maybe you are right. Should I not worry and just live in the moment? Or should I make a conscious decision not to pursue this any further? I don't know if I will send this letter. Maybe I will wake in the morning and rip it up. But tonight I felt the need to write to you and ask the 2 wisest women I know. Take care. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
This is the end of CD 5. The book continues on CD 6. CD 6. Chapter 22. Nate, 2022. Telton Hall looked particularly gloomy, Nate thought, as he pulled into the driveway. The day had started off overcast, and the threat of rain hovered overhead, blocking out any daylight. So much so, the sky seemed closer today. He could see Rhoda's car parked up near the gate, and wondered how she was getting on with the window. He was intrigued to see the process for removing the glass. That's why he was here, of course. It was absolutely nothing to do with the person undertaking the work. No, definitely not. Before he went up to the chapel, Nate popped into the house to make sure his dad was okay. He let himself in through the kitchen so he didn't have to disturb his father. Nate usually had his key to the house with him, but he'd managed to leave that in his briefcase in the office. As Nate went into the kitchen, he saw there was a half-drunk cup of tea on the table, together with a sandwich sitting on a sheet of tin foil. He recognised Rhoda's iPad on the table, with its distinctive Art Deco-styled case. No sign of Rhoda, though, who was probably in the bathroom. He went over to the kettle and topped up the water to make them both a fresh cup of tea. There was no sign of Tink trotting down the hallway to greet him, and the living room was empty. Nate whistled as he set about sorting the cups out, so he didn't startle Rhoda when she came back in. As he waited for the kettle to boil, Nate eyed the open notebook on the table. He was tempted to have a peek, not for any particular reason, he was just curious, but he employed his better judgment and ignored the urge. By the time the kettle had boiled and he had made 2 teas, Nate thought Rhoda should be back from the bathroom by now, unless she was snooping around again, especially if she thought she was alone in the house. That thought annoyed him, even though he wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Surely she wouldn't do it twice, not after he'd assured her he wanted to help. "Bollocks," he muttered under his breath. He pushed himself away from the worktop and went down the hall in search of her. A quick recce of the ground floor told him it was empty, so that meant upstairs. He called out her name and listened. "Up here!" The voice sounded muffled, but it was definitely Rhoda. "Nate! I'm upstairs! I'm stuck! Help me!" Nate took the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the landing in seconds.
Rhoda, where are you?
"Here!" Rhoda was banging on the other side of the door that overlooked the back garden. What the hell was she doing in there? Nate turned the china doorknob, and then, because it had always been a bit difficult, he gave it an extra flick, which released the catch. He opened the door, and the light from the hallway found its way into the darkened bedroom.
What happened? What are you doing in here, and why are the curtains drawn? What happened to your head? Are you okay?
Which question would you like me to answer first? Rhoda gave him a look that Nate always thought was reserved for teachers, mean teachers, when a pupil had clearly not been listening and couldn't answer a question.
Sorry, are you okay? Are you bleeding?
There was an egg-shaped lump on the side of Rhoda's forehead. She lifted her hand to it and touched it with her fingertips, wincing as she did so, before taking her hand away and examining her fingers.
Nope, no blood, just sore. You need to get a cold compress on that. Here, sit down on the bed.
Nate opened the curtains, allowing the meagre offering of overcast daylight into the room. He nipped out and reappeared a few moments later with a clean flannel from the airing cupboard, which he'd run under the cold tap from the sink in the corner of the room.
Hold that to your head,
he instructed her.
Thank you.
She screwed up her face as the flannel came into contact with the lump. She looked around her and took in her surroundings.
Oh, no. Don't say I'm in your father's room.
Nope, it's my room. Well, my old room when I was a kid. You seem surprised you're here.
That's because I am surprised.
She took her hand down from her head. Nate moved her hand back in place.
Don't get all defensive, and keep that on there for a bit longer.
She did an exaggerated eye roll, but complied with his instructions.
I'm not getting defensive. I genuinely didn't know.
What are you actually doing in here?
I was downstairs having my lunch when I heard a thud from up here, she explained. Your dad had left a note to say he'd gone out, but I thought maybe he'd come back and I didn't know. I was worried he'd fallen over, so I came up here.
Okay, but why this room?
Because the noise was directly above me, and I guessed it was this room. It was dark, the curtains were drawn, and as I stepped into the room, I tripped over something.
She looked back to the floor. Nate followed her gaze, but there was nothing obvious that would cause her to trip. He didn't doubt that she had. No one in their right mind would whack their head on purpose to uphold their account of events.
I don't know what you tripped on, but I guess you came down and caught your head on the ottoman at the foot of the bed.
I was stunned at first, and then the door closed behind me. When I got up and tried to open it, I couldn't.
Oh, yes. The lock does get stuck from time to time. Dad was always promising to fix it, but never got around to it.
He nodded towards the bank of wardrobes on the far wall.
That end door isn't part of the wardrobe. It's just made to look like it is. It actually leads into the bathroom. It's a Jack and Jill bathroom. The amount of times I got stuck in here and had to make my exit via the loo.
You're joking. You mean I could have got out myself?
Yep, if you'd known.
Brilliant.
Strange the curtains were drawn, though, said Nate. No one comes in here. I only use the room when I'm staying over. I wouldn't have closed them in the first place.
Does your dad have a cleaner? Nate gave a snort.
You must be joking. I keep telling him he should get one, but he's a stubborn old sod and refuses to entertain the idea.
Well, they were closed. Rhoda frowned, and Nate could tell she was mulling something over. He waited for her to speak. I definitely heard a thud. I don't know what it was, but I didn't imagine it. And why would the door close on its own? It's not spring-loaded, is it?
No, it's not.
Nate contemplated Rhoda's story.
Maybe you caught it with your foot when you went down and pushed it shut.
I doubt it. My legs aren't that long. Nate met her gaze.
What's your theory then, Miss Marple?
Don't take the piss. Nate held his hands palm up.
Sorry.
Rhoda let out a frustrated sigh. I'm sorry too. Just a bit touchy.
Blame it on the bump on the head.
She offered him a weak smile. This may sound weird, but before the noise, I felt as if there was someone in the house. I can't explain it, but I felt twitchy. I dismissed the idea as nonsense and an overactive imagination, but I think actually I was right. There was someone in the house and they were up here. I disturbed them. They tripped me up and shut the door.
Wow, that's some theory,
said Nate.
I'm not dismissing it, but it sounds quite
far-fetched, finished Rhoda. Yes, I know. But I did get that note about not poking my nose into the chapel business. Seems a bit more than a coincidence, if you ask me. Nate couldn't argue with her.
To be honest, both things sound far-fetched. But seeing as you've had a note and then are so sure of what's happened, I'm not ruling anything out. I just don't know who it could be.
I don't care who it is. This is just making me even more determined to find out the truth. I don't give up that easily.
I have no doubt about that,
said Nate. And he didn't. Rhoda was tenacious, if nothing else. Thank you for rescuing me, anyway. She gave him a wry smile. I'd better get back to work.
I've just made a fresh cup of tea.
I'll pour it into my flask and take it up to the chapel with me, if that's okay. She must have registered his disappointed look, which he didn't manage to hide. Why don't you come up with me?
Yeah, great.
Why did that sound so sarcastic? He noted Rhoda attempting to hide a smile. You don't have to, she said.
No, seriously, I mean it. I'd love to come up and see what you're doing.
I'll just need to grab my phone charger from my car on the way. While Rhoda went to collect her charger, Nate waited in the kitchen, having a quick square up. Rhoda returned within a few moments, and he smiled as she came into the room.
All set? Excellent.
His words faded away. The look on Rhoda's face told him everything was other than excellent.
What's up?
Chapter 23. Rhoda, 2022. My car, that's what's up. It's been bloody well broken into.
You're joking.
Rhoda resisted the urge to say of course she wasn't sodding well joking, but managed to construct a more cordial reply.
I wish I was. How did they break in?
Nate was already walking past her and down the hallway. Rhoda followed him out to the car, where the passenger window was shattered. Someone must have really wanted to get in to break the window. It's not exactly easy. Nate looked around the car.
I'm so sorry, Rhoda. Look, don't touch anything. I'll call the police.
Oh, don't bother. They won't want to come out. It's not exactly crime of the century. I doubt they're going to dust for fingerprints and launch a full-scale inquiry. They'll tell me it's not a priority, they don't have the resources, and it's not in the public interest. She knew she was being bitter about the response they had given to the body in the chapel, but it made her feel better anyway.
You should still report it and get a crime reference number.
I don't know if it's worth the hassle. I don't want to claim on my insurance. It will only push the premium up. I'd sooner just get it fixed. Rhoda sighed and opened the rear door, leaning in to look through her bag on the back seat. There doesn't appear to be anything missing.
Maybe they got disturbed,
suggested Nate. Rhoda stood up and rubbed her face with her hands. I've just had a horrible thought. She looked at Nate. Maybe there was someone upstairs in the house just now. Maybe they smashed the car window too. Nate appeared to consider this for a moment.
It's a possibility, but I don't know why. What purpose? To frighten you?
Rhoda shrugged.
That's all I can think of. I must be treading on toes. But you've only spoken to Dad, Aggie, and Joyce Colburn. They're hardly likely to wage a vendetta against you. I can't see Joyce Colburn hot-footing it into the house, locking you in the room, and then running downstairs and smashing your window.
When you say it like that, it does sound ludicrous. Rhoda looked back up at Telton Hall, her dislike for the place growing by the second. You don't think you should get the police out to check the premises, make sure whoever it was isn't still here, hiding in the house somewhere?
I'll have a quick scope around.
No, don't. Not on your own. I'll come with you.
Protection?
Nate raised his eyebrows.
Yeah, why not?
I didn't spend time in a kid's home without learning how to look after myself. Rhoda fell into step with him as they went back across the drive and into Telton Hall. It was quite nice to have a look in all the rooms she wouldn't get to see under normal circumstances. There were 6 rooms on the first floor, all bedrooms, apart from the study. And in the attic there were 2 rooms, one each side of the landing.
This is where the prisoners of war slept,
said Nate, opening a door on the landing, which Rhoda had assumed was a cupboard. It revealed a steep, narrow flight of stairs. She followed Nate up to the landing. They stepped into the room on the right, which had dormer windows overlooking both the front and back of the house. The room was something of a store, with a couple of old chests of drawers, a wardrobe, several cardboard boxes, a dismantled cot, a wicker rocking chair, the seat of which was broken, and a couple of old wooden dining chairs. A thick layer of dust and countless spiderwebs clung to the furniture. "When did anyone last come up here?" asked Rhoda.
Years ago. I don't even know what's in those boxes.
You didn't come up here when you were a child?
No. Was always told to stay out of the attic, just full of junk.
Nate crossed the landing and opened the door to the second room.
Nothing in here at all except an old rolled-up carpet. Probably a nice warm space for mice.
Rhoda pulled a face. Let's not disturb them. 5 minutes later, after every room had been looked into, they were back in the kitchen.
I'll tell Dad to keep the kitchen door locked in future.
He and Aggie are buggers for not locking up, said Nate, checking the handle.
I don't even know where he is. He's been gone a long time.
Oh, he left me this note, said Rhoda, pulling the crumpled sheet of paper from her pocket. Gone to see your aunt. She passed it over to Nate to read.
I'd better go down there and let them both know at the same time. Might make Aggie take it seriously. You're going to be all right on your own, or do you want to come with me?
Admittedly, Rhoda didn't fancy being in Telton Hall on her own now.
I should get back to work, really. Can you just wait until I can come up with you? For my own peace of mind, so I know you're okay up there.
Yeah, sure. Rhoda appreciated Nate was making it sound as if he was concerned and allowing her to give in without losing dignity. Truth be told, the prospect of being in the chapel alone wasn't exactly appealing.
Then I'll get your car window fixed so you can at least drive home safely.
Rhoda wasn't used to anyone looking after her, but she stopped herself from protesting. She appreciated the gesture. Aggie and Jack made all the appropriate sounds of being shocked at what had happened, but neither seemed overly concerned. I can't imagine why anyone would do that to your car. Must be kids, concluded Aggie. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. I need a word with you two. Rhoda exchanged a look with Nate, who appeared equally bemused.
What's that?
He asked. I've had Joyce Colburn on the phone. Apparently you, she pointed her finger towards Rhoda, you've been round there pestering her about Sylvia Montgomery. Rhoda was aware of the sideways look Nate gave her, but she avoided eye contact with him. Instead, she addressed Aggie. I was just asking her if she knew who Sylvia Roberts was. I wanted to find out if she remembered anything that could help discover the identity of the remains in the chapel. I didn't mean to upset her. There's not many of us old uns left, said Aggie. We don't want to feel hounded just because you've got some fanciful idea about those old bones. Rhoda was just about to protest at Aggie's description, but Nate beat her to it.
Aggie, it's not just old bones. It's someone, a man. He deserves to be laid to rest properly, and the only way to do that is to find out who he was. That's all Rhoda wants to do.
But if he was murdered, as is claimed, then someone is going to be upset, said Aggie. They'll want to know who did it. Then that could be a proper can of worms opened. Mark my words, no good will come of this. You're both best leaving well alone.
I can't promise that, said Rhoda. But I really must get back to the chapel now. Otherwise I'll get in trouble for holding up the work, and they'll send someone else down to do the job.
She said her goodbyes and left Telton Cottage with Nate alongside her.
Sorry about Aggie, said Nate. She speaks her mind. I don't have a problem with that. No, I don't suppose you do.
Nate grinned at her, and Rhoda couldn't help breaking into a smile herself. Does Sylvia Montgomery still live in the village? She asked.
She does, as it happens, and I know what you're going to ask me next.
No time like the present.
I thought you had work to do,
said Nate, coming to a stop at the beginning of the drive to Telton Hall. I can go and see her while my car gets fixed, after I've done my work, that is.
You've got it all figured out, haven't you?
I like a plan. Now, can you see if Sylvia Montgomery will speak to me, please?
All right. I'll see what I can do.
They made their way up the driveway, stopping at Rhoda's car to have another look at the damage.
I don't think it was kids. Do you? She asked.
Probably not. I'll get onto the garage once I've checked the chapel for you.
They made their way up the hill. You know, all this is connected to the letter I received, said Rhoda, zipping up her jacket as the wind cut through her sweatshirt. Someone doesn't want me finding out the truth. Or some people.
Yeah, I did realise. But I also know why this is important to you.
They came to a halt outside the chapel door.
You do? Of course.
Nate reached out his hand and rubbed Rhoda's upper arm.
If you can't find peace for your own family, then you want to find it for this man's.
Rhoda nodded.
I hate feeling helpless. Trying to find Dean makes me feel that way. I don't know how much longer I can go on. Every day, waking up with hope there's been a breakthrough, a sighting, a message from Dean even. And every morning I look at Facebook and my phone and there's nothing. It's demoralising, not to mention painful. I feel a failure. I've let him down.
Hey, you're not a failure at all, insisted Nate. I know you might not like to hear this, but Dean has failed you. Walking away like that, not even letting you know he was okay. He must have known how upset you'd be. It's not fair what he's putting you through.
Rhoda bristled at the criticism levelled towards her brother. A flare of indignation rose within her, and she shrugged off Nate's hand.
He hasn't let me down. What if he was suffering with mental health issues? That's the logical explanation. He wasn't thinking straight. Going off like that was out of character. Don't you dare say he's let me down.
She could see the alarm in Nate's eyes, swiftly followed by hurt, but she was angry, and she didn't know how to handle what was essentially the truth. Dean's lack of contact, anything to say he was okay, hurt her deeply. It was something she could only acknowledge privately to herself. She didn't need anyone pointing it out to her. Admitting that Dean had let her down would be disloyal, and if she was disloyal, she'd be forever punished by never knowing what had happened to him. Rhoda opened the door to the chapel and went in, not waiting for Nate to check it out first. Everything looked as she'd left it, which was a relief.
All okay?
Nate went over to the confessional box and looked inside.
Yes, everything is fine.
Nate turned and looked at her. She met his gaze, but couldn't bring herself to say she was sorry for snapping at him. She wasn't good at apologising, she knew that, but you didn't survive the care system by being a soft touch. It was a habit she found hard to shake off. Nate blew out a breath.
Right, well, I'll leave you to it.
He placed the skeleton key to the chapel door on the pew.
You might want to lock the door after I've gone. If I need you, I'll phone or text.
Yes, that's fine.
Rhoda picked up the key. The apology was on the tip of her tongue, and she was just about to force the word out when Nate spoke again.
Do you want to give me your car key so I can get the window sorted?
Rhoda pulled the key from her trouser pocket and chucked it over to him.
Thanks. Catch you later.
With that, Nate was gone. Damn it, said Rhoda out loud. No wonder she didn't have many friends. She was pretty crap at friendships. Chapter 24. Alice, 1945. Careful, don't be running now, said Lily, as she and Alice sped out of the chapel. Don't want you falling over and hurting yourself. Is Billy angry about something? Asked Alice, watching where she walked. He had a face like thunder. I've no idea what it's all about, though. Just said he wants you and me in the study. I don't like the sound of this. Is Mrs. Hartwell there? No, she's gone into town. It's Cook's day off. Where are Jack and Aggie? Waiting in the kitchen for us. They reached the house and collected the cousins on their way through. Like nervous schoolchildren sent before the head teacher, they gathered outside the study door. Alice took a deep breath and knocked on the door.
Come,
came Billy's voice from the other side. Alice gave Jack a reassuring smile. It will be all right. Don't worry. Just Billy playing Lord of the Manor. Jack and Aggie followed Alice in, with Lily bringing up the rear.
Ah, good. All four of you here together. Perfect.
Billy was standing in front of the window which overlooked the driveway. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his walking stick was propped up against the bookcase.
Right. I wanted to do this while Louise is out, to save her the embarrassment of having to ask you all something. Trouble is, she has a soft spot for you all, so it makes things like this even more difficult for her.
Alice gave Lily a sideways look. What on earth was Billy going on about? He carried on.
So, I've been looking through the ledgers and noticed that we've been getting through quite a lot of food recently. Does anyone want to comment on that before I continue?
After a moment's uncomfortable silence, Alice spoke up. Have you asked Cook? Billy sighed.
Yes, that was my first point of call. Unfortunately, Cook can't shed any light on it. Seems she hasn't been paying close enough attention. And just so you know, I'm deadly serious about this. I've told Cook she's on a warning. She'll be looking for a new job if she can't keep track of the provisions.
It's not her fault, protested Alice. She hated the thought of Cook being made an example of.
Which leads me nicely on to my next question.
There was a thinly disguised smirk on Billy's face.
Whose fault is it? Who is stealing from the pantry? Who is taking food that Louise has provided?
He reached for his stick and walked around the desk. His stick tapped on the wooden flooring as he took up a new position in front of the desk, looking directly at the four of them.
Which one of you is the thief?
None of us, said Lily indignantly. Why would we steal from the kitchen?
That's what I would like to know.
Billy tapped his stick on the floor impatiently.
Wouldn't be taking any extra food up to the prisoners, would you?
He was looking directly at Alice. No, we haven't, said Alice, feeling her patience grow thin with this pointless questioning.
What about you, Jack? You're being very quiet.
Billy hit the floorboards hard with his walking stick, making Jack flinch. Alice put her arm around the boy. Jack hasn't either.
Right. It must be one of the prisoners then. I would ask them, but they're all lying, cheating bastards. They wouldn't know truth and honour if it slapped them in the face, said Billy. His words curdled with disgust. They can go on half rations for the rest of the week. That will teach them.
You can't do that, Alice found herself saying, before she'd had time to think about it. Billy gave a snort.
Sorry, what did you say? I can't do that.
He tutted and shook his head.
I think you'll find I can. Especially that young one, Paolo. He's particularly untrustworthy. I don't know what Louise was thinking letting them stay here in the house.
Alice knew better than to say anything else. It was her fault Paolo had been singled out. She knew Billy didn't like him, but putting him on half rations was just the sort of despicable thing Billy got enjoyment out of. The sound of someone calling excitedly outside caught their attention. Billy turned around to look out of the window.
What the blazes? That's Louise.
Alice stood on tiptoe to look out. Sure enough, Mrs. Hartwell was running, no less, up the driveway, waving her hands in the air with an excited look on her face.
My word, said Lily. I don't think I've ever seen Mrs. Hartwell run.
Mind out of the way,
commanded Billy, before limping his way across the room.
Come on,
said Alice, taking Jack's hand. They hurried out of the study. By the time they reached the top of the stairs, Mrs. Hartwell was bursting through the front door.
It's over, she cried. The war is over.
What?
Billy stood looking down from the top stair.
I just heard it, in the post office. It was on the wireless. There's going to be an announcement tomorrow. It's going to be all official tomorrow. The Germans have surrendered.
Alice and Lily squealed at the same time. Alice caught Lily's hands, and they jumped up and down before hugging each other. Alice swept Jack up into an embrace as well.
Oh, did you hear that, Jack? It's going to be over.
She pulled Aggie in for a hug too. Even Billy was smiling.
Thank God for that, he said. I knew those Germans were bloody cowards. Yes.
Then, without warning, he caught hold of Alice's arm, yanking her away from the children, and spun her around to face him. Somehow, amid the cheering, he pulled her close to him and kissed her before letting her go. It all happened so fast that Alice could barely register it. Had Billy really just done that? She didn't have time to think about it, as Mrs. Hartwell was calling them all down to celebrate with a glass of sherry. Alice shuddered at the lingering feeling of his lips on hers, and the touch of his hand around her waist.
Here, Alice, have a sherry,
said Billy, holding out a glass to her. Alice shook her head.
No, thanks. I'd rather not.
Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud.
Leave Alice alone, Billy, said Mrs. Hartwell sternly. If she doesn't want to drink, then she doesn't have to have one.
One won't hurt. Not every day we celebrate victory over the Jerrys.
Billy pushed the glass into Alice's hand. Alice took the glass, but had no intention of drinking it. Billy made an official toast, and as he gulped the sherry down, Alice was very aware of his watchful eyes on her. Alice had politely stayed for one drink and then made her excuses about not feeling too well before going up to her room. She could hear the laughter and celebrations carrying on below her. Billy had downed his sherry and then moved on to a bottle of whiskey he had produced from the cellar. With any luck, he'd be flat out soon, snoring on the sofa. She lay down on her bed and looked up at the ceiling. It was then that it struck her. No one had told the POWs. Making sure she wasn't spotted, Alice crept down the stairs, the sound of the gramophone playing and chatter coming from the living room, covering any sound she made. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see Aggie's mother, Marjorie, sitting on the sofa, laughing with another woman Alice didn't recognise. She must be a friend Mrs. Hartwell had invited over to celebrate. Aggie was dancing with Lily in the centre of the room. Fortunately, Billy had his back to the door, and Alice was able to nip past unnoticed. She hurried down the hallway, through the kitchen, and out into the garden, leaving the sounds of laughter and music behind her. Alice found Paolo in the rose garden.
Alice,
he smiled as she went through the archway.
Have you heard the news?
She couldn't keep the smile from her face. Paolo looked confused.
What news?
The war is over.
Paolo's face remained impassive. Alice wondered if he hadn't understood her.
The war is over,
she repeated more slowly.
Germany has surrendered. No more war. End of war.
She didn't know what else to say.
The war is over.
His eyes filled with tears.
Yes, Paolo, it's over.
He flung the rake to one side and clasped his hands together, saying something in Italian, which Alice could only guess was akin to thanking God. Then he launched himself at her, enveloping her in an embrace. Alice flung her arms around him and hugged him back. They did some sort of jig, still holding on to each other and laughing. It didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable with Paolo, as it had when Billy had grabbed her. This felt joyously natural and exhilarating. Then Paolo let go and took a step back.
I am sorry.
No, don't be sorry, said Alice. It's good we are happy. We're not enemies anymore. Not that we were before, but we're certainly not now. She grinned madly at him. You'll be free to go home soon. You'll be able to see your mother and sister again. You'll be able to hug your nephew. Paolo wiped fresh tears from his eyes.
I cannot believe it.
There's going to be an official announcement by Winston Churchill tomorrow. It's going to be Victory in Europe Day, or something like that. Alice stopped talking, noting the sadness on Paolo's face. She took his hand again. Don't be sad.
I am just thinking of all the people who have died during this last 5 years. Not just men doing their jobs, but civilians trying to get by.
I understand, but it's the right outcome. Paolo looked at her.
Yes, it is the right outcome.
They stood in silence for a moment, Alice suddenly feeling self-conscious. Will you tell Carlo?
Of course, I should tell him now.
Paolo gave her a brief nod of his head.
Thank you for finding me with the news.
Oh, Paolo, before you go, there's one more thing, said Alice, suddenly remembering the grilling Billy had given them. Just to warn you, Billy is on the warpath. He thinks someone has been stealing food from the kitchens and giving it to you and Carlo.
That is crazy.
I know. I think he's lying, but he said he was going to punish you.
Me?
Yes, said Alice. He's got it into his head that you've been receiving the food. I'm sure he thinks I've been giving it to you. He's going to put you on half rations as a punishment. Sorry, but I wanted to warn you. There was something about the look on Paolo's face that brought Alice up sharp. Was that a guilty look he'd tried to disguise? Paolo, she said slowly, have you had extra food from the kitchen? Is there any truth in what Billy's saying? He wouldn't meet her eye.
I must go,
he said, and walked straight past her. Paolo, wait! But he strode away without looking back. Alice couldn't quite believe it, but the more she thought about the look on his face, the more she realised he was guilty. It didn't seem possible. Not Paolo. Had she really misjudged him that much? The thought that she had been deceived hung around her shoulders like a heavy blanket, uncomfortable and dirty.
10th of May, 1945. Carissime, Mamma e Sofia. The war is over. The war is over. I have longed to write these words for so many months, and I cannot believe I am actually saying them now. There has been much celebrating here in England. Everyone was cheering and dancing in the streets when they heard the news. I wanted to join in, but I didn't think that would be appropriate. Instead, me and Carlo celebrated in our own quiet way in our room. Honestly, Mamma, I am so happy. I hope you are both all right, and baby Luca is too. I cannot wait to be home. I hope it will not be long before we are repatriated. I don't know what will happen to us in the meantime. We will still be prisoners for the foreseeable future, but I am keeping my spirits up because I know it is one step closer to coming home. Day by day, I am closer to you. Il vostro amorevole figlio e fratello, Paolo.
Chapter 25. Nate, 2022. Nate took Rhoda's car into town, to the garage where his car was regularly serviced.
Won't be able to get a new window for a few days, said Jim, the owner. Not the sort of thing we have much call for, so don't keep it in stock.
Nate had agreed to leave the car with the garage and hired a courtesy car from Jim.
I'll give you a call with all Miss Sullivan's details, he said. Then you can swap the insurance into her name. No problem. Don't let her forget to email me a copy of her license.
The Ford car probably wasn't exactly what Rhoda would have chosen, Nate mused, as he pulled into the drive of Telton Hall. But at least she'd be mobile and could commute back and forth between Somerset and Sussex as needed. He didn't envy her the long drive each day. Next on his list of promises was to see if Sylvia Montgomery wouldn't mind talking to Rhoda. Despite his aunt warning them off, Nate wasn't going to be put off that easily. He found himself wanting to do this, as much for himself as for Rhoda. Discovering the identity of the body in the chapel had become important to him. Last night, he'd looked at the Dean Sullivan Missing Person Facebook page and followed some links Rhoda had put up, taking him to the Missing Persons Register. He'd ended up losing a couple of hours reading other people's stories and plights, the good outcomes and not so good ones. It really had touched him as he tried to imagine what it would be like if he was ever in the unenviable position of not knowing what had happened to a loved one. He could only imagine the pain and anguish he'd feel, though. He knew whatever emotions it stirred in him, they were nothing compared to the agony Rhoda experienced, day in and day out. She was certainly a strong woman, to be able to carry on like she did and to try to find her brother. It went a long way to explain why she had this tough exterior, a little bit edgy, outspoken, and at times uncompromising. Resilient. That's how he'd sum her up. She was one of life's fighters. Nate's father was at the house when he got back to Telton Hall.
How did you get on with the car?
Jack asked from his chair in the living room, with Tink snuggled up on his lap. Tink pricked up one ear and gave a couple of wags of her tail in greeting to Nate before snuggling back down. She was far too comfortable for any overly exuberant welcome, much like her owner, Nate had often thought.
Going to take a few days before Jim can get hold of a new window.
Nate went over to the sideboard and opened the first drawer, which was stuffed with old Christmas cards, pens, bits of string, and a whole load of other rubbish his father shoved in there when he didn't know what else to do with it.
What are you looking for? Asked Jack.
The old name and address book, the black leather one that Mum used to keep by the telephone.
What do you want that old thing for?
I'm looking for Sylvia Montgomery's phone number, replied Nate, now rummaging through the second drawer. His father gave a huff, one Nate recognised with the benefit of a well-trained ear, having heard that huff many times over the years. It was his dad's unspoken signal that he was upset about something. Nate waited for his father to speak, which he did, of course.
You two are obsessed with that bloody chapel. I wish I'd just got the thing bulldozed. Shouldn't have bothered getting that museum to buy it. More trouble than it's worth. And as for questioning Sylvia Montgomery, you're taking it all too far now.
Aha! Here it is, said Nate, ignoring his father's little rant. He pulled out the name and address book and flicked to the M's. Sylvia's name was at the bottom of the page. Nate took out his phone and snapped a picture of it. He certainly wasn't going to call her while in the same room as his dad, whom Nate wouldn't put past trying to heckle him.
Haven't you got anything better to do?
Asked a very disgruntled Jack.
Shouldn't you be at work?
Yes, and yes, replied Nate. But I have the luxury of being the boss, so I can take some time off if I need to. Right, I'll see you before I go.
Where are you going now?
To find a bit of peace and quiet,
Nate called good-humouredly as he went out of the door, leaving his father muttering curses under his breath. 10 minutes later, Nate was outside the chapel. He knocked on the door and called out Rhoda's name. He could hear the radio playing inside and wondered if she would be able to hear him. When the door didn't open after a couple more knocks, he took out his phone and called her. Rhoda opened the door a few moments later.
I'm sorry for upsetting you,
said Nate, taking Rhoda's lead at getting straight to the point.
That wasn't my intention. I was clumsy.
She eyed him for a couple of seconds before speaking.
Apology accepted.
She paused, and Nate sensed there was more to come. I might be a bit sensitive when it comes to my brother, but I'm not going to apologise for that. Just wanted to explain, that's all.
Fair enough. I get that.
He smiled.
Is the air clear?
Yeah, don't see why not. She returned the smile.
Excellent. Now, I've got some good news.
You do?
Yep. Sylvia Montgomery has agreed to see you. If you can come now, that is.
Nate glanced over towards the workbench, where a large sheet of paper was laid out, and 2 small stained glass windows were lying on top. That's brilliant. Give me 2 minutes. Rhoda rushed around the chapel, putting a few things away, before climbing up the scaffolding to secure the board on the second window. Nate watched as she athletically negotiated the tower, without any hesitation, her ponytail swinging as she ducked under a bar to start her descent.
You've done that a few times, he remarked.
I used to be really nervous being on a tower. Couldn't stand up without holding onto the rail. Preferred to be sat down whenever I could, said Rhoda, picking up her bag and jacket. But these days, I barely notice.
I can't imagine you being nervous about anything.
Nate locked the chapel door behind them. Oh, you'd be surprised. Rhoda zipped her coat up and fell into step alongside Nate as they made their way down the hill. He resisted the urge to say he suspected that it wasn't the physical things that scared her, but he was aware that they'd already fallen out once about her feelings and emotions, and he didn't want to upset her again. As they were leaving, Rhoda's phone rang. She answered it as they continued down the hill.
Yes, tomorrow will be fine,
Rhoda was saying.
Okay, yes.
Right, see you then. 10 o'clock. She ended the call. That was the local paper. They're coming over tomorrow. I also had a call from a Vince Taylor. He's a local historian. He asked if he could have a look at the window and write an article for the Historical Society he runs. He's coming over tomorrow too. I checked with your dad and he said it was okay.
You're popular.
I don't think it's me, she replied with a laugh. It's the window everyone's interested in. Nate wanted to argue the point, but decided against it. Sylvia Montgomery welcomed them into the retirement flat she lived in on the west side of the village, a new development to cater for the elderly Telton villagers. Now, what can I do for you? She asked, once they were seated. Are you sure you wouldn't like a cup of tea?
No, we're fine, thank you, said Nate. As I mentioned on the phone, we're trying to research some of the residents who lived in the village during 1945. Rhoda found an article online where you spoke about your mother being a midwife.
Yes, that's right. Oh, I didn't realise you could get that on the computer. I did it a few years ago now. She smiled at Rhoda. How can I help you, dear? Nate sat back and let Rhoda take the lead, asking Sylvia questions about her mother. Sylvia seemed more than happy to share what she knew, obviously enjoying the company and the chance to have a chat. Yes, I did go with Mother to Telton Hall, she was saying. You probably know that Louise Hartwell, Nate's grandmother, was very good to young women who found themselves pregnant and on their own. She organised the adoptions. Poor children. They wouldn't have had a very good start in life if it hadn't been for Louise Hartwell. I know it sounds harsh, but a lot of those young mothers weren't very old and had nothing to offer a newborn baby. Were these adoptions done through official channels? Asked Rhoda. Are there records of who adopted whose baby? I mean, what if the babies grew up and wanted to contact their birth mothers? Where would they look for records? Did your mother keep any notes? Oh, I think they were legally adopted. Louise didn't do it for money, though. She did it for the good of the child. Nate shifted in his seat, aware they were treading on dangerous ground here. He knew Rhoda well enough to spot the tension rising in her voice. Her attitude towards the system dealing with children in care had been soured by her own experiences, and she obviously still had issues with it. He got in first, to try to defuse the potential bomb.
Did your mother keep any notes about the babies she delivered?
She did, actually. She kept a diary, A personal diary, but she always liked to keep a note of the babies she'd delivered. She delivered more than 20 babies in Telton alone over the years. She would have delivered your father.
Have you got the diary? Asked Rhoda.
Yes, it's in the cupboard over there. I have a box with all her midwifery things, her brooch, her belt buckle, the watch she used.
Sylvia rose from her chair and retrieved a black doctor's bag from the cupboard.
It's all here, and this is her diary.
She passed it over to Rhoda.
You can't take it, though, but you can look at it.
Of course, said Rhoda. Is it all right to take some photos of the relevant pages?
I suppose so, but you can't go around showing every Tom, Dick and Harry what's written in there. It's private and confidential. Some of the villagers might not like it, especially if they're in the book.
Oh, it's okay, said Nate. We will be very discreet. We promise. How long was your mother a midwife for? Asked Rhoda.
Here, in Telton. She finished in 1946. My father came home from the war, and 9 months later I had a sister. Mother stopped working then.
Sylvia gave a laugh.
Baby boomer. Isn't that what they're called?
Nate took a photo from his pocket. It was of the group stood outside Telton Hall. Do you recognise either of these two young women in the photograph? That's my Aunt Aggie and my grandmother, but these two, did your mother deliver their babies? It was a bit of a long shot, but no harm in asking. He gave the photograph to Sylvia. Sylvia picked up a magnifying glass from the table and held it to the black and white image.
That must have been taken at the end of the war, or thereabouts.
That's right. Here's another of some POWs, which we think was taken around the same time.
A couple of them. Italian, I think, stayed on at the farm for another year or so after the war, said Sylvia. The girls, I'm not sure about.
She peered more closely at the photograph.
It's hard to remember everything all those years ago, especially the war. When all the men came home, it was an unwritten rule we weren't to ask them about the war. They didn't want to talk about it either. Some of them had witnessed terrible things, been through awful times. They just wanted to come home and have a settled life. My father never once mentioned the war.
It's understandable, I suppose. Rhoda handed the book back to Sylvia. Thank you for letting me look at this. It's so interesting, seeing all those births and the comments your mother made. It's really something special to treasure, knowing your mother helped all these babies into the world.
You know, I've just remembered something, said Sylvia. I'm sure one of those girls in the photograph got married that year. Let me think. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure which one it was.
Why does that stand out in your mind? Asked Rhoda.
I'm not sure. As I say, I was young then, and at my age you don't remember everything.
Sylvia frowned.
Maybe because she'd had a baby and wasn't marrying the father. I don't know, but more than likely something like that. Of course, back then, things like that mattered. These days, it's all the rage, isn't it? You know, to have babies and not be married. Poor kids. Back in the day, they were better off getting adopted, if you ask me.
If you do remember, perhaps you could phone me, said Nate, not wishing to be accused for the second time of harassing an old lady. Neither did he want Rhoda to bristle at Sylvia Montgomery's somewhat tactless, albeit ignorant, comments about adoption.
You should ask your aunt, said Sylvia. I'm sure she was a bridesmaid.
Nate and Rhoda exchanged a surprised look. Aunt Aggie, clarified Nate.
At least I think she was. Sorry, I might be getting muddled up again.
Nate thanked Sylvia, and he and Rhoda said their goodbyes. What do you make of that? Asked Rhoda, as they walked back towards Telton Hall. I'm not sure. Funny, Aggie never mentioned being a bridesmaid. There's always the possibility Sylvia has got it wrong. Rhoda opened her phone. I took lots of photos of the diary. I'll go through them all later and try to gather as much information as I can. I don't know what I'm looking for, or if it will be of any help, but you never know. It might be we just need to join up some dots. We might have more information than we realise. I'll put it all together in a dossier. You're very thorough, aren't you?
Yes, and I make no apology for it.
Wasn't asking for one.
There was her defence, the thing she fell back on to keep her going. Prickly determination. Nate couldn't help but admire her for it. He just wished she wasn't so defensive. Chapter 26. Rhoda, 2022. After speaking to Sylvia Montgomery, Rhoda went back to the chapel. She had taken out 3 of the smaller stained glass windows now and laid them out on the carbon paper, before taking a rubbing of the leadwork and finally marking up the outline so she knew which pieces of glass went where. Once she got the 4th window out, she'd do the same. Then it was a case of removing the glass from the lead, marking each individual piece of glass, and then cleaning them up ready for packaging and transporting. It was important she got this bit right, as it made life so much easier when putting the window back together. The side windows had fortunately not been damaged by the movement of the chapel, so it would be a relatively straightforward task. The main window, however, would prove more of a challenge, not just because of its size, but also because of the damage. Rhoda liked a challenge, so she wasn't particularly daunted by it. The rest of the afternoon went by in a flash, and it was with some reluctance that Rhoda downed tools at 6 o'clock. She still had to contend with the drive back to West Sussex. When Nate had texted her to let her know he'd arranged a hire car, she was, of course, grateful. But the thought of travelling back in a small car, designed more for nipping around town than motorway driving, had left her more than a little disappointed. Not that she had a lot of choice, and it was thoughtful of Nate, so she couldn't complain. Nate had left the key with his dad, and once Rhoda had collected it, she was on her way home. She had never been more grateful to see her little flat than she was over 3 hours later. Roadworks on the M27 around Southampton, together with an accident, had made progress slow that evening. Tea consisted of an uninspiring microwave meal she'd had in the freezer, and by the time she'd eaten, all she wanted to do was flop into bed. She wanted to see if she could follow up on any of the information she'd got from Sylvia Montgomery, but she was too tired. Rhoda knew if she started, she'd end up losing several hours on the internet, and it would be midnight before she even considered going to bed, none of which was conducive to an early start the following morning. "How long have you got to keep this commute up for?" Shani asked Rhoda the following morning, as they undertook their daily swim. The water was calmer today, and looked almost blue. The early morning sun was already reflecting warmly on the surface. 2, maybe 3 weeks, replied Rhoda. I should get the smaller windows finished by the end of the week, maybe beginning of next week. Then it's onto the main window, which is going to take a lot longer. Wouldn't you be better off staying down there? I was wondering that myself. Even if it's just for this week, while I've got that little hire car, it's not ideal for motorway driving. There's bound to be plenty of B&Bs down there. Shani twisted over and floated on her back. I'll have a look into it. There might be a guest house in Telton itself. Depends how expensive it is, really. You'll be saving on petrol. True. And you might have a decent meal for a change, instead of the microwave rubbish you seem to love so much. Love is a bit of a stretch, replied Rhoda. Like is perhaps more appropriate, but they're convenient if nothing else. And unhealthy. It wasn't unusual for Shani to turn up on Rhoda's doorstep with what she claimed were leftovers, when Rhoda was certain the meal had been cooked especially for her. At first, Rhoda had objected, but Shani had been persistent, and Rhoda knew the gesture came from the right place. Sometimes it was nice to be looked after. Rhoda couldn't fault Shani's logic of staying down in Somerset while she worked on the chapel. It would also free up several hours each night, which she could use researching the identity of the chapel remains. Before she set off for Somerset that morning, she sent Nate a quick text message asking if he could recommend any accommodation in Telton or nearby. As an afterthought, she added she didn't want anything fancy, just somewhere to put her head at night. Nate had texted back immediately.
Sure, no problem. Leave it with me.
The drive back down to Somerset that morning did nothing other than convince her that finding accommodation close to Telton Hall was the best idea. What were all these people doing on the road this early in the morning? The Radio Travel Information Service, piping up with a warning of extra delays around the New Forest area due to a broken-down lorry blocking one of the carriageways, was the deciding factor. Rhoda was glad she'd packed a bag and wouldn't have to make the return journey that day. It was a brighter day in Somerset, and having been given the key to the chapel to hold on to, Rhoda made her way up the hill as soon as she arrived. She didn't want to be pestering Jack all the time. It was amazing how different the chapel looked when the sun was out, and as Rhoda went over recent events, including the poison pen letter, she didn't have the same sense of foreboding. However, she did check all the pews and the confessional box just to be certain she was alone in the chapel, before locking the door and getting on with the next side window. When it came to lunch, Rhoda went back down to the house, where she could make use of all the mod cons. She tapped on the kitchen door, hoping Jack would hear her, and as she looked through the pane of glass, she was surprised to see Nate in the kitchen. He opened the door for her.
I've popped in on my lunch break. Was hoping to catch you, he said, before she had a chance to ask. I've just made the tea. Come on in.
Thanks. I'll nip to the bathroom first.
Dad's in the living room,
said Nate over his shoulder. Rhoda poked her head around the door and exchanged pleasantries with Jack. She couldn't help noticing he seemed a little on edge. Everything okay? She asked.
As good as it will get, I suppose.
He picked up a letter from the side table.
The developers won't budge on the sale date. I've got 3 months, and that's that.
Oh, no. I thought they'd let you have a bit more time in light of everything. Rhoda stepped into the room. Have you been in touch with any of the housing contacts I left you?
I haven't had time.
Rhoda reined in a smile. He sounded like a sulky schoolboy. She was in no doubt he hadn't rung because he didn't want to. Would you like me to call them?
No, it's all right. I'll do it this week.
I'll check up on you.
I'm sure you will.
This time, Rhoda didn't withhold the smile. She couldn't help warming to Jack Hartwell, despite his reluctance to conform to what society expected of him. She got that. Actually, Jack, can I ask you a quick question?
You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer.
There was a twinkle in his eye, despite the grumpiness of his tone. It's about one of the girls in the photo that was hanging in the hall. Do you remember one of them getting married? Aggie was bridesmaid.
You're not still going on about that, are you? I thought you were going to forget all that.
Rhoda perched on the edge of the sofa adjacent to Jack, so she didn't seem overbearing. Not that she thought he'd be easily intimidated, but it felt the polite thing to do. I can't. I really can't. I feel compelled to find out who those remains were. Someone, somewhere, will have missed him. Someone would have cared, I'm sure of it.
And if they didn't?
Jack held her gaze. If they didn't, then maybe we should. Jack made a huffing sound, his fingers drumming on the arm of the wing-back chair.
I was only a lad. I can't remember, to be honest. If there was a wedding, it would only have been a small affair, not like weddings these days. You're better off asking Aggie.
One last thing, I promise, said Rhoda. Billy, your sort of stepbrother, what was his surname? Jack looked at her for a moment before finally answering.
Stoker. Now, is that all?
Yes, thank you, Jack. I'd better get on. Nate's threatening me with a cup of tea. Jack held up his hand.
Oh, before you go, Nate told me you were looking for some digs for the next couple of weeks.
That's right. The commute is longer than I anticipated, especially with that little hire car. It makes sense to be somewhere more local during the week.
Right. That's solved, then. You can stay here.
For a moment, Rhoda was dumbfounded. Oh, that's very kind, but honestly, I wasn't angling for an invite. I was genuinely looking for a B&B.
We know that.
Nate came into the room.
It makes sense to stay here. In fact, it was Dad's suggestion when I mentioned it to him. It's not like we're short of space.
Oh, I don't know, said Rhoda warily. I feel like I'm imposing myself on you.
Stop being so silly, said Jack. Nate's going to make one of the rooms up for you. Now, don't be arguing, even though I know you'd like to.
There was that twinkle in his eye again, and Rhoda felt the fight going out of her. She had somehow been ambushed by the Hartwell duo, and much as her instinct was to decline the offer, she couldn't think of a sensible or logical reason to do so. She pushed aside her reservations about Telton Hall itself. The oppressive and maleficent feeling she sometimes experienced was just her imagination, a leftover from her institutional childhood, when a big house like this had often meant unhappy children and unhappy memories. "Thank you, that's very kind, much appreciated," she said eventually. "I'll stay on one condition."
"Of course, there had to be a condition," muttered Jack.
"You let me cook for you in the evenings. It's the least I can do." A short while later, when she went back to the kitchen, Nate was waiting for her with a sandwich and a cup of tea.
"Glad to see you didn't let him have it all his own way."
"Where would the fun be if I did?" Rhoda pulled out the chair and sat at the table.
"This looks very nice, thank you."
"Did you get a chance to look at any of the info from Sylvia Montgomery?" asked Nate,
taking the seat adjacent to her.
"I was too tired last night," Rhoda confessed.
"The drive home was a complete pain, and I knew once I started on the research train there would be no getting off it until well past my bedtime."
Nate laughed. "I don't blame you. Hopefully that's one problem out of the way now. I'll sort the room out in a minute. It's the one at the end of the landing. It overlooks the back garden."
"Has it always been a guest room?" asked Rhoda, thinking back to when Telton Hall housed the young women.
"Yeah, as far as I know. Being an only child, it was always the spare room."
Nate took a bite of his sandwich. "Haven't you ever thought about all the people who have lived in the house before you and imagined what they did?" Nate finished his mouthful of sandwich before answering.
"Not especially. It's just always been my family home. The history is just part of the house."
He paused, putting his sandwich down.
"Sorry, I didn't mean to sound insensitive. I didn't mean to flaunt my privilege to you."
Rhoda waved the apology away.
"Honestly, I'm not that sensitive about it. I've never had what you describe. I don't have roots or a sense of belonging. I'm not bitter and twisted about it, not at all. I've never known any different." "Doesn't mean you can't wish for it, though," said Nate gently.
"No, you're right, it doesn't.
And when I was younger, I did wish I was more like the other kids at school, but it wasn't a deep, burning desire. Not enough that it made me sad, just wistful at times, that's all. The one stable thing in my life was my brother, and look how that's turned out."
She gave a self-deprecating laugh to mask the pain. The lack of home life, lack of permanent friendships, lack of stability didn't bother her. She could cope with all that. But having Dean disappear from her life was another matter.
"What about your parents?" asked Nate.
Rhoda shrugged.
"Not much to tell. I've no idea who my father is. Mum always claimed it was a one-night stand at a festival." "And your mum?"
Rhoda ran her finger around the edge of her cup. She rarely spoke about her mum. It was a habit she'd adopted soon after she went into care. Somehow, though, she felt compelled to open up to Nate.
"My mum was a drug addict. That's how me and Dean ended up in the care system. They tried to let us stay with her, but she was too hooked on heroin. Eventually, they took us away for our own safety. She couldn't look after us. Even when she tried to get clean, she was a complete train wreck."
Nate reached over and took her hand.
"I'm sorry, I had no idea."
Instead of pulling her hand away, Rhoda held on to Nate's, anchoring herself as she spoke again.
"She did love us, but she was ill. Addiction is an illness. That's why she couldn't look after us. Where is she now?"
Rhoda pressed her lips together and looked up at the ceiling, blinking back the tears.
"She's dead. An overdose when we were 13. Christ, I'm so sorry."
Rhoda shook her head and swallowed hard.
"It's fine. I can't deal with sympathy, though. She took her hand away and plastered a smile on her face. I really need to get back to work. Thanks so much for the sandwich. She got up from the table, aware she was leaving Nate rather shell-shocked. Will I see you later? Not tonight. Sorry. Got to catch up on all this work I keep missing. Then he added, I can come back, though, if you need me to. He gave her a meaningful look. She appreciated his thoughtfulness. I'm okay, honest, but thank you. I'll pop in again tomorrow, though. Make sure you're all right and Dad hasn't driven you to distraction. Or the other way around, said Rhoda, wanting to upgrade the mood from downright miserable to something rather more cheerful. No danger of annoying Dad. He likes you, really. As Rhoda glanced back from the doorway, the wink and grin Nate threw her way sent a flurry of butterflies in her stomach. After a productive afternoon and a pleasant tea with Jack, where he stuck to his side of the bargain and allowed her to make an evening meal for them both, Rhoda retired to her room early. She didn't want to get under Jack's feet, and she also had some research she wanted to do in private. She'd already been up to her room to wash and freshen up after a day's work. It was a square room with a fireplace on the interior wall, which she assumed backed onto the bedroom wall next door to her. Apparently, that was Isaac's room. Nate's room was on the opposite side of the hallway, not that it was of any interest to her. Rhoda sat on the bed and began looking through the photographs she'd taken of the midwifery diary belonging to Sylvia's mother. Anne Roberts had indeed delivered a lot of babies. There was a page for each birth where she had noted the parents' names and any siblings they had, together with their addresses. She flicked through the pages, looking for Alice Renshaw's name, but found nothing. A second, more careful look was equally fruitless. That was annoying and a little strange. Why wasn't Alice's name in the book? Had she had the baby somewhere else? Maybe she didn't stay at Telton Hall, or maybe the babies of unmarried mothers weren't recorded. Or was it because the baby was adopted? Something didn't sit right, but Rhoda had no idea what. It struck her that a search of the parish records might tell her if any of the babies had been christened. She wasn't sure of the protocol for children who were to be adopted, but it was worth looking into. There was a christening font up at the chapel. Maybe the babies had been christened there, out of sight of the disapproving congregation. It was all conjecture, and without the blasted records for Telton Hall, Rhoda was at yet another dead end. Her thoughts turned to Dean. Although she had never given up hope that he would turn up one day, Rhoda was also very pragmatic, and she knew there was the god-awful possibility that Dean would die, and she wouldn't know. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It wouldn't be the first time she'd searched for a death certificate for her brother. It wasn't something she did often, but once or twice a year she needed to reassure herself that he was still alive. It wasn't a fail-proof determination, but it was the only thing she had available to her. She swallowed and tapped in his name and the year 2022. All she had to do now was press enter, and in a few moments she'd know if a death certificate had been issued in the last... She thought back to when she last did this. 8 months. She closed her eyes and pressed the enter key before she could talk herself out of it. It was a good 30 seconds before she opened her eyes, and the screen of the laptop came into focus. No results matched your search. Rhoda blew out a breath. You're still out there, Dean, she whispered. I'm still looking for you. This is the end of CD 6. The book continues on CD 7.